Can someone, just like anybody, please block for Ashton Jeanty this year? Welcome in, everybody, to the reveal of the number 30 team in my preseason power rankings, as today we'll be taking a deep dive into the Las Vegas Raiders, a new look Raiders team, a new coaching staff, multiple new quarterbacks, including the number one pick, Fernando Mendoza. Lots to get into. Maybe things will be different this time around for the Raiders. That is the ultimate hope, the ultimate goal. As we do get started, if you've enjoyed the deep dive series, if you're looking forward to this discussion about the Raiders here today, please do take a second to hit that like button down below. It's a free and easy little thing that really does show your support for my channel and this series. And of course, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of these deep dive team preview videos throughout the course of the summer as we lead up to the number one team in my power rankings. And we'll begin here, as we do in this deep dive series, going through every segment of this team, through the position groups, and beginning here with the coaching staff, taking a look at their offseason changes, and ultimately asking the big question of, did they get better, worse, or stayed the same from everything that changed this offseason? And as we start with the coaching staff here, a full overhaul here. They say goodbye to pretty much everybody. Pete Carroll, of course, was a failed head coaching hire. Unfortunately, listed here are some of the guys they waved goodbye to midseason as the ship was sinking. Chip Kelly, the offensive coordinator, that did not work out. Honestly, I like the hire, but it was such a mess last year. Chip Kelly could not overcome it. Tom McMahon as well was fired midseason as their special teams coach. And then I had to list on there, I don't list every position coach, but offensive line coaches, in my opinion, are the most important individual position coach on the team. And when there are big changes with an O-line coach or other position coaches, I will list it in this section here. It's a little bit much to track all of the different position coach changes and try to provide an opinion on all of it. But in this case, I do list the departure of Pete Carroll's son, Brennan Carroll, who was tasked with coaching the offensive line here for the Raiders last year. I do list that as a big addition with him being fired here. It was one of the worst individual coaching jobs we saw last year, a nepotism hire gone wrong to the highest degree, really. So with Rick Dennison stepping in as the O-line coach now, I would say the smallest of shoes to fill there, but it'll be hard to provide worse offensive line coaching than what we saw last year with a unit that was one of the most underachieving units in the entire league. And then one piece here that is a big loss for the Raiders, Patrick Graham is going to seek out a different opportunity with the Steelers. It's just been a lot of regime change and a lot of the Raiders not picking him as the head coach. And I think it was just time for a change of scenery there. But I do really like Patrick Graham, and I think he's done a pretty good job making chicken salad out of chicken shit with this Raiders defense for a while now. So I'm excited to talk about him when we do get to the Steelers deep dive. And I do look at Patrick Graham as a legitimate loss for this organization. But even with that loss, as we look at the additions for the Raiders coaching staff, I do ultimately say that the Raiders upgraded their coaching staff. And the biggest reason there, of course, is landing Clint Kubiak. To me, this was the crown jewel of this NFL head coach hiring cycle, kind of the perfect archetype of what these teams are so often looking for, the young, ascending, offensive play caller of a head coach, typically that stems from the Shanahan coaching tree. And who better than Clint Kubiak, the son of Gary Kubiak, who for so long was kind of the Robin to Mike Shanahan's Batman. And these two families have really been tied together and synonymous for this system. And the gains that Clint Kubiak has shown since his earliest days calling plays as the offensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings, kind of following the shoes of his dad, not doing so great there, but getting that second opportunity a few years later with the Saints, where he crushed it on a bad football team. And then, of course, last year, winning the Super Bowl was a huge part of the Seahawks' success last year. And I think for the Raiders to be able to land Clint Kubiak with where the Raiders were kind of at, I don't want to say they got lucky, but I will say it was right time, right place, where Clint obviously liked what he saw in Mendoza, and the Raiders had that number 1 pick. I don't know if Clint takes this job if he either A, didn't like Fernando Mendoza, or B, obviously, if the Raiders didn't land that number 1 pick last year. So however you want to look at it, this is huge to be able to get Clint Kubiak. Again, in my opinion, the number 1 head coach candidate from this hiring cycle. But he brought a pretty good staff with him. And some of these guys are sticking around. Andrew Janico, I was a little surprised, honestly, that he didn't stay in Seattle, where he was the quarterback's coach in Seattle. It would have been very easy for Seattle to just promote Andrew Janico here, who, as we'll see in a second, has a very solid resume himself. But he's going to be the sort of left-hand man, not really calling plays, presumably, at least early on here, but a nice addition to the staff nonetheless. They do promote Rob Leonard, who's been around here as their defensive line coach underneath Patrick Graham. He gets his opportunity to run this defense, and I think there's some excitement for him as well. And then they're going to be going with Joe DeCamillis as the special teams coordinator as well. So a lot of change here. I think a lot of reason for optimism with the Raiders landing Clint Kubiak. Again, I said upgraded for their offseason changes there. But let's dive deeper into this coaching staff, breaking down what this team's going to look like schematically, and then also how I have the Raiders ranked among other coaches in the league as we head into this season. So starting at the top with Clint Kubiak as a rookie head coach, I've gone back and forth between actually ranking the rookie head coaches and just leaving them off the rankings. We've done it both ways. I think it's more fun to just kind of have a little bit of a take and put these rookie head coaches in there with all of the existing head coaches and see how it plays out and see how these guys continue to climb. And with that, I'm optimistic enough with Clint Kubiak to have him as the 18th ranked head coach as we head into the league, and with the up arrow on him as well to prove that he can be even higher than that, maybe a top 10 coach sooner rather than later, and one of these premium offensive-minded head coaches that quickly ascends the ranks, a Kevin O'Connell, a Matt LaFleur, Ben Johnson, Liam Cohen, all of these guys. That's obviously the hope for Clint Kubiak, and there's plenty of reason he can't get there. But needless to say, he's got work to do. I also have an overall coach and culture ranking, which is sort of the team's benefit of the doubt slider. And of course, having an exciting coach come in is great to have, but he is going to have to set a winning culture, teach this team how to win, and allow this team to kind of earn higher ranks in that regard and earn more of that benefit of the doubt as a football team. But again, there's total hope that that will come in time. But yeah, as I've mentioned, Clint Kubiak will be bringing very much that Shanahan-style coach into the Raiders organization here. It's a slight departure than where they've been for the most part. Pretty much all these teams have played around with wide zone and, play action Shanahan concepts, but the Raiders have been a little bit more of a north and south run game, more of a spread style approach, a pro spread style approach, not necessarily fully leaning into this type of play calling mindset. So it will be a little bit of a shift for this organization in that sense. We are actually 3 for 3 so far in this deep dive series with offenses being in that Shanahan scheme. So I've talked about this where it's like every deep dive I have to kind of debate how much time do I spend breaking down what the Shanahan system is, because we spend so much time talking about it. In this case, I think I will take the shorter approach and say, yes, expect, as we've seen with Clint Kubiak's offenses and in this system, expect a large dose of 12, even 13 personnel, heavier packages, outside zone, play action shot plays being the base of your offense. It's a proven system around the league, and for good reason, and that's what we're going to see here, and I don't think we're going to have any mistake about that. It is definitely worth noting, though, that the Seahawks last year were right, I would say, next to or even behind the Rams in terms of this 12 plus 13 personnel revolution around the league of teams really leaning into those heavier packages. It's been well documented throughout the season and the offseason as something a lot of teams are heading towards. And yes, I'm sure Clint Kubiak took this job because he's excited to work with Mendoza, but I think he looks at Michael Mayer and the versatility of a Brock Bowers in those heavier packages as something that he can really have some fun with schematically with this team. And I think we see these Raiders lean very heavy into 12 and even 13 personnel, and certainly a lot of those condensed formations out of those sets. Now, as far as the actual offensive coach rankings that I have for these teams in this series, very respectable year for the Raiders. Clint Kubiak, as far as the calculations for this series go, already uplifting this offense a decent bit as a starting point, and room to grow as well, of course, but I have them with B grades across the board, which gets them in the top half for both pass game coaching and run game coaching, 9th to 15th for pass game and 7th to 13th for run game. We saw both the run and pass take an uptick in that Seahawks offense, and even the Saints the year before with Clint Kubiak. So I think he's a very well-balanced Shanahan-style coach, par for the course in terms of what makes for a great, encouraging sort of archetype hire that seems to work more often than it doesn't. And then as you look at Andrew Janico as well, I don't want to just gloss over him. I initially would have, but as I dug deeper into his resume, again, I'm pretty surprised that the Seahawks didn't retain him. And they know what they're doing there, obviously, and they hired someone, I think from the Niners, to be their offensive coach, and we're going to do a deeper dive into him when we get to the Seahawks, obviously a little bit later in this series for the Super Bowl champs there. But looking at Janico's resume, kind of feels like he was worthy of becoming the, play caller there in Seattle. Maybe they just didn't like him, or maybe Clint really made a compelling case to come with him here to the Raiders. But really an impressive resume, man. I mean, he goes way back to working in Minnesota, like next to Kevin Stefanski there under Norv Turner and Pat Shurmur for 3 years there from 2015 to 2017, and then really got embraced by the Shanahan, McVay, Kubiak coaching tree in a bunch of different spots. So he was still in Minnesota with Kevin Stefanski there from 2018 through 2021, and that would have been, I believe, when the Stefanski, there was like 4 or 5 straight years where the Vikings had a different offensive coordinator, but somewhere in there, Stefanski would have left for Cleveland, Janico would have stayed, and then I think been under, Clint Kubiak and Gary Kubiak there 2019, 2020. So there's a lot of crossover there with Stefanski and the Kubiaks. And then after his time in Minnesota, he goes and coaches under Luke Getsy, who stems from the Matt LaFleur, and not just Matt LaFleur, but Sean McVay, and not just Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan. Like, that's the whole coaching tree there. So he stayed in that system in Chicago. And then after that, he reunites with Clint Kubiak in New Orleans and follows him to Seattle. So he's kind of seen it all. He's seen a little bit more of the traditional pro-style offenses back with like Norv Turner, a little bit with Pat Shurmur, and he's definitely spent, at this point, almost 10 years embracing and learning the Shanahan system. So I think he's very qualified, and if things go really well here, this could be another name that pops up from this coaching tree here. So someone to keep an eye on for sure. But yeah, very encouraged by this offensive staff coming in. And then you take a look at the defensive side of things, and likewise with Rob Leonard, I was really impressed by his resume. At first, I was like, oh, okay, they lose Patrick Graham, and they just want to keep the guy that's been in-house. Like, okay, how qualified is this guy really? But he's got a pretty damn nice resume, dude, and I'm excited to see what vision he has for this defense, because yes, he's been under Patrick Graham here and has learned a lot of that kind of 3-4 multiple, almost Belichickian style defense that Patrick Graham has run here. But it predates that, dude. And he's worked for some of the biggest names in this industry beyond Patrick Graham. He worked under Brian Flores for 3 years in Miami. He worked under Mike McDonald in Baltimore in 2022. And even before he worked directly under Patrick Graham, he worked with Patrick Graham underneath Steve Spagnuolo with the Giants in 2015 and beyond. So he has not just run this sort of Patrick Graham style defense, which is a 3-4 style base, a very multiple aggressive type of defense, but did work under Brian Flores, Mike McDonald, and Steve Spagnuolo, who are, Jesus, man, maybe the 3 highest regarded defensive coaches in the NFL today. And I don't want to spoil things for the series, but maybe my top 3 ranked defensive coaches in this series. So that's pretty freaking nuts from a resume background. And it brings, Steve Spagnuolo's a 4-3 style front that is completely different from what Patrick Graham and Brian Flores run. And Mike Macdonald, likewise, is at the forefront of the, modern meta split safety Macdonald system. So he could really, reshape this defense in any given image that he has for this defense. And from a schematic point of view, I think it's very much wait and see to see what he wants to do here. You would imagine there's going to be some carryover, of course, with what they've done with Patrick Graham, which has been a very blitz heavy multiple defense. They last year, for example, were 4th in the league in the amount of 0 blitzes that they ran. A lot of cover 3 on the back end of that, which is pretty normal. If you're going to be a blitz heavy team, a lot of fire zone blitzes are going to be your cover 3 types of looks. But I wouldn't be surprised if this shifts in any given direction as he takes a look at a very new look defense. As we'll see, they made a lot of changes with this defense and kind of caters a new look defense for his new team. So I definitely am keeping an open mind with Rob Leonard. Seems like a very reasonable kind of pivot and promotion with Patrick Graham out the door here. And I even put the wild card icon on Rob Leonard because seeing this resume, getting to work with those coaches that we named, if he's just a superstar that's been in the waiting and he can really elevate this defense, that, we put the wild card on kind of the biggest pivot factors on this team. This defense is going to need a long ways to go, but if they have found some gem of a defensive coach here and or promoted someone that's been in-house here, that could really sway things and I think get this team closer in terms of where they finish to probably where Raiders fans wanted to see them ranked in this series. I don't know how many Raiders fans are going to be happy seeing them come in as the 30th team in my power rankings here. But the rankings, by the nature of this series, are kind of a placeholder near the bottom of the league there, with a C+ grade across the board for the defensive coaching in both pass and run defense coaching. C+ grades, which get them tied in the kind of bottom tier. Again, just kind of like the unproven placeholder ranking. I've said this in previous deep dives already, but I really don't think there are, especially on the defensive side of the ball, bad coaches in the league right now. More just some are better than others and some are more unproven. And the Raiders obviously are going to fall in the more unproven category for now. Ultimately, though, I do really like this staff. I'm excited to see them get to work and hopefully, make this ranking, quote unquote, age like milk. Again, these are preseason power rankings, ranking teams at their floor. As we get into the roster here, you'll see this team has a long way to go to develop towards being a better football team. But I do think this staff has a lot of potential to get them there for sure. So I like how things are shaping up there. Now, before we get into the roster and talk some quarterbacks here, I want to thank the sponsor for today's deep dive, and that is SeatGeek. This is one of the best times of the year for sports. Even though we're all NFL fans, we've got NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs. Baseball is about a quarter of the way through, and the summer months are here. Like, this is the time to go catch a ball game. If you want to go catch a hockey or basketball playoff game, SeatGeek has got you covered with the best app, with the best user interface, and the best prices. They make it easy to browse your seats. Just look for the green dots. You know you're getting the best bang for your buck. They're always market competitive prices. I'm always keeping an eye out for a good deal if I'm going to a Twins game or any concert or whatever it is that I want to go to. I keep my eyes open. I always find myself back at SeatGeek. You get your tickets right in the SeatGeek app. You don't have to jump through email chains and third-party vendors and have this stressful experience as you approach the gate. It's all right there in the SeatGeek app. SeatGeek has been a phenomenal partner to work with over the years. I'm super thankful for them and for sponsoring today's deep dive. So go get your tickets, show your support back to them. Use promo code TFG10 and you'll save up to $20 on your first purchase as well. So again, thank you to SeatGeek. You guys all go have a good time wherever it is you're headed. And let's get back to the deep dive here. But let's now turn the page to the roster breakdown for the Raiders, where we will start with the very exciting changes that they made with this quarterback room. And of course, they say goodbye to Geno Smith, a signing that I was pretty optimistic about, I'll be honest. And it just was a shitstorm last year. Not only did Geno Smith regress and not play well and was making bad decisions and not playing like he did in Seattle, but didn't have a whole lot of infrastructure from either a coaching or surrounding talent standpoint to have success. So rightfully, they are moving on from Geno Smith in terms of how he played last year for this team. It's a pretty unsubstantial loss, even if I think he can bounce back for the Jets this year. But the additions, well documented. They land Fernando Mendoza with the number 1 pick in this draft, a very big addition there. And then they do bring in Kirk Cousins, of course, who may or may not actually start for this team to begin the season. That is going to be the big question coming out of camp for this Raiders team. But yeah, as far as offseason changes go, you got to say hopefully upgraded, right? Like, you make the big investment at number 1. You definitely think long-term certainly will be upgraded. And you're definitely hoping that Mendoza, or maybe it is Kirk Cousins, but you're definitely hoping that one of these guys is going to be able to play better than the quarterback play they got last year from Geno. But as far as how this quarterback room ranks coming into the year for me, I have the Raiders ranked 25th with the combination of Fernando Mendoza and Kirk Cousins. And I do list Mendoza first because I certainly think he will start more games than Kirk Cousins this year. It might be a month or so of Kirk Cousins. I would be pretty surprised if Kirk plays the full year. He would have to be playing Kirk at a very high level. Like, he played pretty well down the stretch for Atlanta. I think the arm and the comfort with his body post Achilles was getting there. And I think he played much better down the stretch last year for Atlanta. But he would probably have to be playing closer to how he played in Minnesota that final year, which was, that was like a top 10 quarterback, but he would have to look like a top half quarterback in the league, I think, for the Raiders to not at some point go to Fernando Mendoza. But it could very well be a 4 to 6 week thing where they want to make sure Mendoza has a full comfort level with getting to the huddle, getting through all his checks, the pre-snap alignment, like just having all of that tied up and not having to think twice about it and be able to play fast and make decisions fast. I think the extra month to 2 months can actually go a long way towards the quarterback stepping in and looking comfortable. It can sound silly of like, well, if you're going to start him week 6, why wouldn't you start him week 1? I think those 6 weeks, especially for a guy like Fernando Mendoza that is going to be so dialed in and putting in that time, like that can be a very valuable amount of time to get up to speed with everything you want to see. So I do think in terms of like strategy of bringing in Kirk in addition to Mendoza, like I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's almost like the old Andy Dalton line of once Fernando Mendoza can clear in practice looking better than Kirk Cousins, that's a great litmus test of, okay, you're ready to go. You can take on NFL competition now. And I think Kirk at this point should be a really good mentor for Mendoza, even if he's not necessarily holding his hand, just to have that pro in the building and a guy that has had to win in the NFL with a similar lack of like athletic ability and improvisational skills, having to really win with his mind as Fernando Mendoza, as more of a pocket passing oriented prospect that he is. Just studying underneath that guy will prove useful. So just like that's kind of the intro to this conversation is just how they've constructed this room and how things are going to play out. But the second part of this conversation is like how I think Mendoza plays in his rookie year and beyond. And I'm kind of on the record saying like I'm maybe a little bit lower on Mendoza than this sort of universal hype train that he's a surefire number 1 pick, like can't fail quarterback prospect. I have said he, to me, on average, is probably about the 3rd best quarterback prospect in any given draft. In this draft, he happened to be number 1. in a very bad quarterback class. The Raiders desperately needed some hope and optimism at quarterback. They had the number 1 pick. I can't fault the Raiders for picking him, but I am on the record saying, like, I think you really need to put the right infrastructure around this guy for him to prove worth the number 1 pick. And I think the coaching staff pairing him with Clint Kubiak was an excellent step in that direction. We'll talk about some of the other pieces on this team and if he's going to have the protection and the run game and the defensive support and the weapons. He needs all of it. I really do believe that. And I think he had all of that at Indiana, where they were able to simplify things quite a bit for him. His tape at Indiana, while really fun to watch and really efficient football, was pretty, I don't want to say easy quarterbacking, but it's like they turned the sliders up for him, right? Like, he had very good protection. He had receivers that made awesome plays for him that were more often open than not. He didn't have to go through to his second read very often. And honestly, when you did see pressure get in, you saw some pretty ugly moments from Fernando Mendoza trying to escape pressure, not having a great second answer, not having the athletic ability to get himself out of trouble. I think when the difficulty knobs get turned up, the volatility on Fernando Mendoza starts to boil quite a bit. And I don't want this to be an overwhelmingly negative conversation. I just also don't want to like fully sugarcoat this as all rainbows and butterflies when that's just not fully how I viewed Mendoza as a quarterback prospect. I obviously love the Clint Kubiak hire, but I think if this looks closer to what it looked like with the Raiders last year, where the protection isn't great, they don't have much receiver help, the defense is getting annihilated, they need big games every week from the QB, and Mendoza gets dropped into this thing, that's literally the opposite of the infrastructure he had at Indiana, and I think that is historically when you look at quarterbacks being a bust, right? I think that is a possible outcome with Fernando Mendoza. I really do. And I think a lot of people are uncomfortable saying that because the hype train just really got off the rails with them winning the national championship, with there not being any other quarterbacks to kind of contest him in this quarterback class. I've seen him brought up with like Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence and Caleb Williams as prospects. And I'm like, whoa. Mendoza in those classes would have been the 3rd or 4th or 5th quarterback prospect based on how I saw him. So I do want to get that out of the way, but I also don't want this to be all negative. I think there is still a path for Mendoza to become a franchise quarterback. His arm is fantastic. Everything you talk about him in terms of the preparation, the leadership, the smart decision-making, yes, within a lower level of difficulty offense, but it's not like he made a lot of mistakes. For some reason, the Purdue game was super ugly for him, but outside of that, it's like, yeah, he didn't put the ball in harm's way. He was super accurate, made the right reads that they asked him to make. And then on top of that, he can run, man. Like, he can not just scramble for first downs. If you play man coverage against him and you get lazy thinking that this tall, rigid guy is not going to beat you with his legs, he has long striding speed and some toughness as a runner, as we saw in that kind of famous, gritty run for the touchdown that we saw in the college football playoffs last year. He will make you pay with his legs if you give him opportunities to do that. And that's just a nice thing to sprinkle on top of someone that you're hoping is going to be a really good pocket surgeon. But he does need to prove that he will attack the middle of the field more often, which he was not asked to do at Indiana, where it was a lot of fades and attacking the slot, outside the number, out routes and stuff, which is great that it's in there, but you want that full package. You want to be able to attack the whole field and be willing to do it without putting the ball in harm's way. He's got to show that when pressure upticks, he can navigate that better. I do think the pocket presence with him, there's no doubt he's willing to take hits and will stand in there, but can he navigate pressure, find those open spots in the pocket? He can show a propensity to bail out of clean pockets at times when that first read isn't there. There's some questions there, right? And that's all why having a good offensive line in front of him is going to limit some of those from showing up as weaknesses at the next level. But I think a best case scenario is something like what Dak Prescott has been for the Cowboys, a top 10 quarterback in the league, a surgical, accurate, strong-armed quarterback that can beat you with his legs, but doesn't always look to do so which is more often a positive than a negative, but sometimes you see some of those physical limitations in terms of improvisational ability hold the guy back at times. But I think that's in there as well with Mendoza. So I'm not here to fault the Raiders for taking him. It's just he is, to me, a little bit more of a risky quarterback prospect that will be even more dependent on having the right infrastructure around him than other guys that can kind of make up for stuff with their athleticism, improvisational skills as they develop, as the team around them develops, because so often we see these guys go to young rebuilding teams like the Raiders. So I think having a Kirk Cousins there to kind of ease this process can only help. I'm not expecting a career resurgence from Kirk Cousins, to be honest. And he plays great. Mendoza sits the whole year, and we have this feel-good story there. If it happens, great. I would say that's pretty unlikely. But as we head into the year, I have the Raiders ranking 25th at quarterback there. And by the way, I know we just covered Mendoza pretty well there, but I do have a full 30-minute film analysis of all of his strengths and weaknesses back from this January, already talking about his fit with the Raiders. So if you want an even further dive into Mendoza, you can certainly go check that out as well. And with me saying that the surrounding cast is so important for a Fernando Mendoza, let's get into the rest of this offense and what he has to work with. And by the way, I don't really feel the need to spend much time on Aiden O'Connell still hanging around here as QB3. I think we have a pretty good understanding of what he is, but I'll at least mention that he's down there as QB3. But yes, let's talk about the running back room. Not a whole lot of change this offseason, just a swapping of backups as Raheem Mostert is out the door and I would imagine heading towards retirement at this point. But then they spend that 4th round pick on the polarizing Mike Washington, who does ultimately go in the 4th round, despite a lot of draft hype on him. And I mentioned it in the cold open, but can somebody please block for Ashton Jeanty this year? Because that was one of the most frustrating experiences as a football fan, just watching the Raiders grind Ashton Jeanty literally into the ground so often with nowhere to go. One of the worst O-lines in the league last year, and this team was yet another example of why you really want to have a solidified confidence in your O-line before spending a top 10 pick on a running back. And we're hoping the Cardinals, who we just did in our last deep dive, can, prove that their O-line's in good shape and make that pick worth it and all that. But man, it was hard to watch. A 3.7 yards per carry season on Ashton Jeanty, didn't even surpass 1,000 rushing yards, despite getting 266 attempts. This was kind of a worst case scenario when we knew Ashton Jeanty was going to be the focal point of this offense with where they drafted him and who he was as a prospect. And it was really frustrating, just the fact that now, I don't want to say he's a forgotten commodity, and I think certainly he can get that hype back very quickly this year. But it's just frustrating to come out of that year and, not a whole lot of people are talking about Ashton Jeanty. And even myself, as a huge believer in Ashton Jeanty's future in this league, I can't bring myself to rank him as high as I really want to. Now, I do have the Raiders ranked 7th to 13th with a B+ grade, a very respectable ranking still, which is not reflective of what Jeanty's stats were last year, what his efficiency was. That would be more bottom 12 in the league. Clearly, I'm still a believer, but it is frustrating that I can't come into year 2 of Ashton Jeanty in the way that I fully expected and how I felt about him as a prospect, that we would be heading into year 2, and it's like, yep, this is a surefire top 3 running back in the NFL. We're just not there yet on Jeanty. Now, if the line's better, I think he'll get there. I think it really is that simple. You're still talking about a player that was 6th in the NFL in missed tackles forced. His high-end runs still show the guy we perceived at Boise State, that perfect blend of contact balance, breakaway speed, toughness, and vision as a runner. I think he got a little bit bounce heavy as the season went on, just kind of getting a little bit frustrated with nowhere to go. There were some times where he could have put his head down and gotten 4 or 5 yards, but was looking to bounce things outside a little bit. I think that was just more of a, reflection of the infrastructure he was running behind than him himself. And fortunately, they're going to run a lot of outside zone here. So he's going to get a healthy dose of opportunities to get the ball outside. And then when they ask him to run inside, I think he will stick his head down and churn out the tough yardage that they're going to ask of him on those plays. Like, I really think the world of Ashton Jeanty, man, and I've got the up arrow on him. I think he breaks through this year. I'm absolutely buying into, like, if you're talking fantasy football, like, I'm kind of all in. Even if I'm not super high on the Raiders here, ranking them 30th, I think things will be good enough that Jeanty has that 1,200 yard season. He's going to be a touchdown machine. He's going to be a part of this passing game, which he was last year. Caught 55 passes. He's their best pass blocker, in my opinion. He's going to be out there on third down. So, like, I can't rank Ashton Jeanty as high as I really want to, but I don't really have a bad word to say about him. I'm excited to see him in year 2, hopefully with a better infrastructure around him. Now, I will say, if I was on the line between pushing the Raiders up into, like, because we got a tier, right? Here's 7th through 13th at running back. If I was on the fringe of putting the Raiders in this tier and maybe a tick above them with how I feel about Jeanty, they ended on the low end of that decision because of their backup room. As great as Jeanty is, you don't want him going over 80% of your carries. Like, 1 out of 5 carries should still be going to someone else, especially if this team isn't winning every football game and, you're trying to draw this thing out. Jeanty does have a pretty heavy workload on him already. He's already over 1,000 career touches now between 1 year in the NFL and his time in college. And they don't have another guy to give the ball to here. I'm very low on Mike Washington Jr. I looked at him as a player that got some buzz in this draft class because somebody had to. This was a historically bad running back class. I think, if someone wanted to do a film essay deep dive into was that the worst running back class ever, I think the answer would probably be yes. I can't really speak on like 70s, 80s, 90s, but in the 2000s, this was the worst running back class we've ever seen. I said it. I think my RB, just from keeping the grading system the same, I think my RB 24 last year would have been RB 6 or 7 this year. Like, that was the gap, which is just absurd. So, yeah, when that's the nature of this running back class, a position everybody wants to find sleepers at with the nature of the industry and fantasy football and everything, Mike Washington coming out and running in the 4.3s as he did was going to gather some eyeballs. And he had about 3 or 4 really impressive highlight runs at Arkansas that got shared around. If you actually watched a full game of him or all of his carries on the season as I did, it is unbelievably underwhelming and a litany of weaknesses on his profile. I could read them to you, but you might fall asleep. To summarize, he has effectively no creativity in regards to both his vision and elusiveness. He's got slow processing skills in terms of picking the right lane and seeing bounce out lanes. He's a high cut athlete where it's an easy tackling target for guys to swipe at his ankles. He doesn't break a lot of tackles. He doesn't have stop-start athletic ability. He's a one-track runner. He's got a lighter lower half, which reduces his contact balance and leg drive. He fumbled the ball. Fumbled the ball 7 times in his last 2 seasons. He's a late bloomer who was just okay at Buffalo and New Mexico State, with all due respect to those programs. And he offers nothing in the receiving game. Literally, the only selling point is if you get him in a straight line, he's big and theoretically fast, but even on tape, he looks slower than the 4.33 he ran. The only selling point on Mike Washington is there was like 2 plays, I think against Tennessee, where he's like dancing around defenders in the backfield, and he did run a good 3-cone drill, and in those 2 plays, you can see like the theoretical agility, but for an older prospect, how often are you going to get that guy? Is it 0.02% of the time like it was in his final year at Arkansas? That's not enough. So they're going to have to really bring out something that wasn't there on his college tape. I think for a 4th round pick in this running back class, fine, a gamble on upside. I think a lot of people are going to say, oh my God, they stole the perfect, home run threat complement to Ashton Ginty in the 4th round, because a lot of people saw Mike Washington getting mocked in the 2nd or 3rd round. I think he's a standard day 3 running back prospect with athletic gifts that he isn't going to make the most of. So I'm betting against Mike Washington here, so much so that I'm keeping my eyes open to the other backs to take advantage, of those bonus carries. And Roman Hemby, in this situation, Fernando Mendoza's teammate there, split carries at Indiana. I think he is a better running back right now than Mike Washington, unless Washington surprises us. Wouldn't be surprised if he, as a just much worse version of Ashton Ginty, as someone that has a little bit better vision and contact balance and receiving capabilities, and just play now ability compared to Mike Washington, who's such a project. And Dylan Laub is just such a receiving oriented back. I don't see a lot of running the football upside with Dylan Laub. Roman Hemby as an undrafted pickup might end up being the RB2 in this backfield, at least for this season. And then maybe long-term, you're looking for a guy. Mike Washington has that potential. He's going to get that opportunity. But if he frustrates early, would not be surprised if they turn to a much more, again, pro-ready type of back in Roman Hemby. So keep an eye on that. Fortunately, these are all conversations about a backup running back, and they'll be able to solve that in time. It hardly hurts this team. This is Ashton Ginty's backfield for the vast majority of time. And that's a very good thing that I think will prove to be a legitimate strength for this team as early as this season. But let's now shift our focus to the pass catchers here in Las Vegas, a portion of this team that I'm actually surprised that they didn't invest more in, considering they go get the rookie quarterback in Mendoza, and especially considering what I said about Mendoza wanting to do as much as possible to surround him with the requisite weapons to have success as a young quarterback. And I would say this is probably my core worry for the Raiders and the early portion of Mendoza's career. As we look at their offseason, they're staying neutral at wide receiver, but that's not enough. I mean, Jacoby Myers is listed there. He was a midseason departure, gave them 41% of their snaps last year. Tyler Lockett was a non-factor. Their losses are pretty insignificant, right? Especially considering Myers was a midseason trade. But their additions, man, Jalen Naylor was a nice 4th receiving piece, maybe 5th if you include Aaron Jones with the Vikings. They pay him a good chunk of money as their big addition with their weapons. Okay. They draft a deep threat in Malik Benson in the 6th round, and then more of a kick returner in Derek Young follows Kubiak over from Seattle. And that's it. That's your list of additions. They didn't do anything at tight end. While they didn't lose anybody, they didn't add anybody. Obviously, staying neutral there. You could argue for the added snaps with Brock Bowers missing about 5 games last year. It's relevant, but it's not really an addition. Yeah, man, as we look at this group of weapons, it's a concern for me. I think it's a practical group. It's better than what we talked about, at least with the Dolphins, our 32nd team in these deep dives. But I do have the Raiders ranked 31st for weaponry in the NFL with a C grade, which is kind of a baseline of functionality, but nothing that's really, I think, set up to elevate a young Mendoza. And like I said, is a question mark for this team, no doubt. I am going to start with the quote-unquote tight end in Brock Bowers here, who this passing game is going to live or die through. And I'll be honest, I couldn't quite bring myself to put the red cross on Brock Bowers after missing some time last year, but he got banged up in college. He missed close to a third of the season last year and played through injuries at times. Brock Bowers has got to stay healthy, man, because if anything happens to him, I don't want Mendoza on the field. I want Kirk Cousins to suffer through that. But as long as Bowers is out there, that's what really lifts this up. He's freaking awesome, man, and he's the rare player that I put 2 position listings on him. Yes, by nature, he's a tight end. He only played tight end about 40% of his snaps. The rest of them come as a slot wide receiver or even like legitimately just flexed outside as an X wide receiver. And ironically, it was the Seahawks that drafted Elijah Arroyo, and they were like, oh, yeah, we could use him as an X wide receiver if we really wanted to. And I kind of called out, like, yeah, that's not going to happen. Coaches say that crap all the time and then never actually do it. Well, Brock Bowers is pretty much the one tight end that will actually legitimately just line up outside, and the Raiders will say, yeah, press him, see what happens. So he will literally play everywhere. Outside wide receiver, slot wide receiver, inline tight end, flex tight end, as a Y, as an F, you name it. They can move him all over the field. And honestly, I probably should have constructed this graphic with Michael Mayer on there as a starter, because the Raiders' starting tight end is actually Michael Mayer. Brock Bowers played 210 snaps as a next to the tackle, true off tackle tight end. Michael Mayer played almost 291 snaps, despite his total snap count being a little bit lower than Brock Bowers. 465 for Mayer to 606 snaps for Brock Bowers. And some people take that as an insult to Brock Bowers, and if you look at it that way, you're just not looking at things the right way. It would be an insult to just stick Brock Bowers in line and say you're a tight end. It is the fact that you can come out with both of those guys, and defenses are forced to decide, do we match their 12 personnel with our base defense with 4 defensive backs on the field, or do we match this with our nickel defense? Because both these guys can run block, but them both being out there forces defenses into a bind, gets you those mismatch problems, not just in terms of Brock Bowers potentially getting matched up with linebackers and safeties, but for your run game, it creates mismatch problems. If they come out undersized, you do have a size advantage in the run game. It is just an unbelievable advantage. The fact that Brock Bowers you can show that as 12 personnel and teams have to prepare for it, but this guy can legitimately just be the best wide receiver on your team. Stop, pause, no ifs, ands, or buts. Whether it's X, Z, or slot, Brock Bowers is the best at it on this Raiders team right now as currently constructed. So he's incredible. The only reason I don't have him as an elite graded player is because, I think he was that in year one. I need to see multiple years at that level with my process before I put a guy at that level. I fully expect if he's healthy, we're going to be looking at this Raiders team next year, and he's going to be up into the 90s. He's very likely going to be who I consider the best tight end in football, even though it's kind of a cheat code with him because he's half tight end, half wide receiver. But yeah, man, the Raiders should lean very heavily into Bowers. And even when Bowers was healthy, I was a little bit frustrated with how little they used him. Just watching the Raiders, it was like, why don't they throw him the ball more? Because he's a mismatch problem. He's elite after the catch. He catches everything. I honestly think his closest comp as a player is Cooper Kupp, just in terms of what the strengths are, where they dominate, how good their ball skills are. Prime elite Cooper Kupp. It's just Brock Bowers does all that stuff at 235, 240 pounds, whereas Cooper Kupp was a good 15, 20 pounds lighter. And obviously Clint Kubiak had Cooper Kupp. So that's a fun name to bring up in this conversation. But I really think, and it's not like Clint Kubiak had any reservations from just fully leaning into Jackson Smith and Jigba if teams weren't covering him and just peppering him over and over again. A healthy Brock Bowers on this Raiders team could and should see 175 targets. Is that overboard? Maybe. I mean, that'd be towards the top of the league from last year. Jamar Chase was at 182. Puka Nacua was at 200, including some playoff games there. JSN in 20 games was 182. Trey McBride in a 17-game season was 163. I think 175 should be a nice kind of preseason goal for the Raiders if Brock Bowers can stay healthy. And I think that can be a functional unit for now. to get you through the season as you hopefully look to upgrade the rest of this group. Now, again, if anything happens to Brock Bowers, which I didn't put the injury risk red flag like thing on him, because he did get through his rookie season healthy. Complete knock on wood here, and maybe it's a part of the reason you don't fully lean into him to that capacity, is just increased risk for injury. But yeah, man, if anything happens there, yikes. I have a hard time getting too excited about anybody in this group of pass catchers. Jack Besh, honestly, is the only other guy I really have the up arrow on. But if you go through these wide receivers, and we'll circle back to Michael Mayer for a touch, but Trey Tucker, I think, is what he is. He's an undersized athletic wide receiver who's solid as a wide receiver 3. I think him in a healthy situation would be like what Jalen Nailor was in Minnesota, as probably the 4th most targeted guy in your offense. He's got vertical speed. He can be a vertical threat. He can be a design touch guy. He's a very good route runner. They haven't had the best quarterback play to really help Trey Tucker elevate, but he's just had ups and downs, inconsistencies. I feel pretty good about what he is. He's a very useful NFL player as a wide receiver 3.5, like the 4th most targeted guy in a healthy passing game. I would certainly not bet on him taking some crazy leap or put the up arrow on him, though. Jalen Nailor is in that same category of tier of wide receivers in terms of caliber. A little bit different of a player. So like him and Trey Tucker can play off each other. Nailor's very tough over the middle of the field. He was very clutch in moments in Minnesota. I think can make some bigger crunch time contested catch wins for them. I think a little bit more consistent as a run after catch threat. He's got a little bit more size. Sure, those two guys, if you could put a legitimate number 2 above them, they could fall into a healthy role as both wide receiver 3s here. But those are your 2 best wide receivers. So that's where we're at with this Raiders team. And then you have Jack Besh, who Pete Carroll's staff drafted very high, 2nd round, got all excited about him in the pre-draft process, and then continued to choose to pretend he didn't exist, which was a disgrace because there really wasn't any signs that Jack Besh can't play football, but we didn't get the opportunity to see that he is as good as I thought he was coming out, and the Raiders seemingly thought he was coming out, and then just did not play the guy. But Jack Besh in this offense can be very fun. He's a really unique wide receiver. He projects into a very specific role as a kind of physical mold. And honestly, I would look at him as a quasi 13 personnel asset for this team, 13 personnel being a 3 tight end package. Yeah, you got Ian Thomas, you got Connor Hayward who can do some fullback type of stuff. You'll mix those guys in certainly, but I think much more often it's going to be 12 personnel with Jack Besh, maybe as more of that second wide receiver / 3rd tight end, because he was such a great blocker. He plays close to 220 pounds. He can absolutely play off the wing, square up, even like some of the undersized outside backers, slot corners, safeties. He can square those guys up and play a factor in the run game. He's great after the catch. He's got really light feet. He's got contact balance and physicality there. And he's a snappy route runner. He's not very fast. He's not going to stretch the field, but as a part tight end, he can absolutely stretch the seam and be a factor in that part of the field. So that's where I really project him in this system. Honestly, we talk about Cooper Kupp. That is largely the role Cooper Kupp played in Kubiak's offense last year, which we didn't see as a super productive position. There were some games where Cooper Kupp showed up big time in certain matchups when teams really took away JSN. But I really like how Jack Besh projects in this offense as an uplifter of the team. Fantasy production and all that, I own Jack Besh in a handful of dynasty leagues. I really hope he can take an even larger role. There's not a huge sample size of him like dominating outside the numbers, winning back shoulders, being more of I would say like the back shoulder X wide receiver for Fernando Mendoza, where he threw a ton of back shoulders to Elijah Surratt specifically. I think from a physical profile, Jack Bech could be their Elijah Surratt in this offense. The scheme is entirely different though. So that would be an area I think to keep an eye on. Like if Bech is lining up outside, can he start winning contested catches, back shoulders, maybe even create some vertical stack and separation? That's a little bit more of a tough ask for a guy that's just not that fast. I think he's always projected as kind of a Jawan Jennings, baby Cooper Kupp type of receiver at the next level. There's definitely a role for that in this offense that I can get excited about. We'll see though. Like that outside bigger bodied wide receiver skill set is something I really wanted to see the Raiders address in the draft, where they didn't elect to pair Mendoza with Surratt with plenty of opportunities to do that. They elected not to go get like Denzel Boston, which I think would fit into this room literally perfectly. Like, God, I would get excited about this group if they put a true outside X with these other skill sets. They're missing that right now, and Jack Bech is the only guy that could maybe do it. Or maybe Dante Thornton, Tennessee wide receiver, one-track athlete, very one-dimensional player. It is true vertical threat, but he's 6'5", 4.3 speed. If he had the right quarterback play, which you're hoping that's going to be with Mendoza, who throws a gorgeous deep ball, you're hoping that those skills can be unlocked. He has some bit of a release off the line of scrimmage, Dante Thornton. He showed moments of being able to track the ball in that Tennessee offense that just puts these guys in a tremendous amount of space to capitalize on their speed. He would be the first of these Tennessee wide receivers to really work out, but I'm at least interested in him because of the undeniable physical tools. And you could also mention, honestly, Derek Young and Malik Benson, who I think round out their wide receivers in the same role projection. Derek Young was originally like a 7th round pick for the Seahawks, just in the dream image of maybe he could be DK Metcalf in our offense at the time, because he's big, strong, fast. He's had some moments of making tough catches down the field, but he's been a great kick returner for the Seahawks. At least last year he was. That's really why they brought him in here. But he will compete with Dante Thornton. I would put those guys in a very similar plane as far as vertical weapons and what they've proven at the NFL level. And then Malik Benson did the same thing at Oregon. He's a straight line speed threat as well. So those three guys really would be your rotational vertical threats. With Tucker can also get down the field. He kind of operates to all three levels. And that's kind of your starting six, or your rostered six. I don't think the rest of these guys make the team. Dorsett's been around. Maybe if you want more of a punt return oriented guy, that would be Dorsett. Shedrick Jackson played a little bit last year. I'm not overly familiar with his game. Chase Roberts had some fans in the draft. I didn't see it. I didn't think he was consistent enough at BYU. Didn't love his body control and the hands. I think he went undrafted for a reason, but there's some physical tools there. And then it's a bunch of other undrafted types. So I would certainly project, again, Thornton, Young, Benson to round out your depth. And that's not great depth. Those are all total flyers. To have one or two of those guys on your roster can be fun. To have it be literally the entirety of your wide receiver depth, that's a little scary, especially if injuries start to stack up in terms of like drops, reliability, being in the right place being in the right place at the right time. For a couple of quarterbacks, they're going to rely on timing and sometimes winning contested catches for them. It's just not good, man. It's not. I think we'll come out of this year, and it's in some area, if not 2 or 3 areas, are going to need some more wide receivers here. Now, as I said, we'd circle back to Michael Mayer. He's the classic, like, wide tight end. He's a pretty good blocker. I think he's getting incrementally better there. He's really tough after the catch. He's got strong hands. He hasn't quite reached the upside that myself and I think a lot of people thought he might have as more of a Hunter Henry level wide tight end, which is probably the best player in that archetype. Maybe if he can stay healthy, and I know he's dealt with some mental health issues and seems to have come up on on the green end of that, on the positive end, and kind of conquered it, which is great to see. I'm not super close to the situation, but the fact that he got on the field as much as he did last year, I think was a big step in the right direction for him. And now hopefully a new just environment, coaching staff, better quarterback play. Like, hopefully he can really settle in, and maybe this is the year we really see Michael Mayer break through, he was a top 40 draft pick, like really good tight end prospect. Maybe we do see him break through as, like, right now I would say he's just a guy, but like a very solid starting wide tight end. Maybe we see him break through as more than that. I don't know that I'm necessarily betting on it, but there is some theoretical upside there. And then the rest of your tight ends are more like rotational roles. Like Ian Thomas would be your true 13 personnel guy who's kind of stuck around the league because he's 260 pounds and tries as a blocker and has some good games in the run game. And then Connor Hayward is a move piece. He would be your, who's the guy Seattle drafted last year? I'm gonna have to look this up. Robbie Owls from Bama. He would be that role, which is a reasonable signing as a move piece, fullback, wing tight end, that type of stuff. And then Albert O is here, super athletic guy coming out, has really only appeared in flashes. If he makes this team over Ian Thomas, maybe there's something. But that's kind of a big if, I would say. And then you have your pass catchers. Ginty isn't like the dynamic athlete out in space of like Jeremiah Love or Christian McCaffrey, where you're going to line them up and like dot guys up as a route runner and like be this move mismatch type of running back in the receiving game. But in a more practical sense, Ginty does have incredible upside to still be a top 5 to 8 receiving back in the NFL. Coming out of his second season at Boise State, he drew a lot of Alvin Kamara comps, not just because of the physical aesthetic with the short dreads and the arm tape, but the receiving production that 1 year at Boise State was incredible. And with his contact balance, just getting check downs, whether it's on a hook check down or out to the flats, any sort of defensive back is going to be having a bad time trying to get him to the ground. He's been a sure-handed player going back to college. Did have 4 drops last year that you want to see him get cleaned up. He's got really good upside as a pass blocker. I still think there's an up arrow on Ashton Ginty in the receiving game as well, where he's already a B-graded player there. But I definitely think he can be still one of the better receiving backs in the league, even if it's not like from a dynamism point of view. More like we would talk about with like Kareem Hunt, for example, on the field was always a problem in the passing game, especially with the Chiefs. Beyond that, keep an eye on Dylan Laub, I suppose. If Ginty needs a breather, I'm not putting Mike Washington out there. If Roman Hemby makes the team, he did some pass catching in Indiana and has a chemistry there with Mendoza, so that maybe would be, we talked about Hemby's potential there. But Laub, great route runner, a ton of pass catching production in college, has hung around and has opportunities here. I would keep an eye on Dylan Laub getting some pass game production, and if something can click there and you get some more stability with his role, he could absolutely carve out, I want to be careful saying like Darren Sproles, but the idea of that true receiving back role on a team, Giovanni Bernard, those types of guys become a little bit more of a dying breed, but Laub could do that. He just kind of hasn't fully proved it yet as a small school guy, but I'm still not writing off Dylan Laub. I loved him in that role coming out. But that concludes your group of weapons. Most teams have gotten really good at this, at least constructing a practical group of weapons, and the Raiders are no different there. I mean, the Dolphins kind of stand out in terms of being even a tier behind the rest of the league. Like the Raiders are closer to 30th in the league for weapons than the Dolphins are to the Raiders here, for example. And I would say as long as Bowers can stay healthy and the new staff can really lean into him, you can get through this year with a functional group. Hopefully you get a couple guys that do take steps up. There's a couple guys we talked about there, Besh, Mayer, maybe Younger, Benson Surprise, Dylan Laub, get a little bit of progress there, get through the year to a practical degree, and then continue to address wide receiver in the future. I think that's a best case scenario. I do not think this is enough for a rookie Mendoza to have this dynamic passing game and light up the league and be some playoff sleeper team off the passing game alone. I just don't think the Raiders are quite there yet. Not to poo-poo this group. There's practical options here. I think the best case scenario is these guys are good enough. You get Mendoza looking pretty good, get him through the rookie season with his confidence with these guys, and then continue to get better here. But I do think this is an area of weakness for this team, especially relative to the rest of the league that is loaded with much better pass catchers than this. But we got one more position group with the offense left. It's the offensive line, which has a legitimate chance to be the most upgraded unit, not just for this Raiders team, but for the NFL. This was easily one of the worst offensive lines in the league last year from a unit that had expectations to be a pretty good unit. There are existing players on this team that either underperformed or got hurt last year. The coaching, as we mentioned, was putrid, not just from a development and scheming perspective, but from just who they were playing and where. There was a lot of conversations about, players and coaches kind of questioning if guys are playing where they should be, and are they playing guys like Jackson Powers-Johnson when they should be. They waited way too long to get him on the field, I think. Just weird, right? So even if they just brought all the same guys back and changed coaching staffs and got Colton Miller healthy, which they did, that was a big part of it, was their franchise left tackle played the first month and then didn't come back the rest of the year. Felt like that kind of got swept under the rug. Surrounded by all the other chaos that was the Raiders last year, that was a big deal. So getting him back, presumably fully healthy this year, it's not like Colton Miller's had a bunch of injury issues. He's largely been healthy other than last year. It was only 2023 where he missed some time otherwise, really. Not even 31 years old and just got an extension last offseason. That's major to get him back. Jackson Powers-Johnson went through kind of a nightmare second season that we'll elaborate on. You get those guys back, that's kind of an upgrade in its own right, but they also make Tyler Linderbaum by far the most highly paid center in the league. They escalate the center market by 50% just because they had FU money in terms of cap space and just did it. And it's going to be fun to see what happens to the interior offensive line market following suit with that. I know a lot of teams were probably not happy to see the Raiders escalate the interior O-line market in that sense, but the Raiders don't care. They got themselves a great center in Tyler Linderbaum. And then they also spent a third-round pick on Trey Zune out of Texas A&M to get into the mix here. So major additions. The losses are pretty minimal. Dylan Parham was okay last year. That's a notable loss. But Alex Kappa struggled. Stone Forsythe, you could honestly color in green, addition by subtraction there. I couldn't believe the Panthers gave him a contract. I thought for sure he was headed to the UFL after playing way too many snaps for this team last year. But yeah, man, massively upgraded on the offensive line. This could be fun. Now, they still have a ways to go. Like I said, you could make a case this was the worst offensive line in the league last year. It's still a massive upgrade to get to here as their floor with their ranking, where I have them ranked, actually tied with our last team, 26th to 27th for O-lines in the league, but at a much more workable place here than where they were last year. They ranked 19th to 23rd for run blocking, which is great news to Ashton Ginty. And then a little bit lower, some more questions with the pass blocking. Still not horrible, but 24th to 28th in pass blocking. But let's go through this unit, which could shift as the year goes on with some of the areas that do have question marks that lead to some of those slightly lower rankings there. Left guard and right tackle specifically, but let's begin with your foundational pieces. Left tackle, Colton Miller. Like we said, him missing the last 3/4 of the season last year kind of got swept under the rug. That was a huge deal. You have a legitimate do-it-all franchise tackle here that just got a big contract extension that really hasn't missed much time in his career. He really spent the first 3 to 4 years of his career developing. He wasn't great to start. And I think being on the Raiders, a guy that he did struggle as a rookie. He didn't get the recognition for a while until honestly, like maybe his 6th season as a legitimate top 10 tackle in the league. And that's what he is. And he struggled, especially as a run blocker for like the first 2 to maybe 3 years of his career. He's made massive strides, improving his pad level, sticking on blocks, being better in that phase too. He's been borderline shutdown and pass protection for the most part. He's just a really freaking good player, and getting him back is a huge deal here. So you plug that in. We're going to skip left guard for a second. We'll come back to it. But they signed Tyler Linderbaum. Again, $27 million a year for a center is a lot of money. And a lot of people screamed like, what are you doing? You can't pay a center that much money. I just think this is going to age perfectly well for the Raiders, and it's going to be a message to the league like, yeah, okay, tackles get paid a little bit more. We value that position a little bit more because they're harder to find, and like like those guys have to be left on an island a lot of the time. Like, I get that, but I think this is still, we're going to look back on it and it's like, yeah, center and guard are still pretty damn important, and paying that guy $27 million, especially on the open market with a guy in Tyler Linderbaum who's a second contract, former first-round pick that had, no business ever hitting free agency. I still don't understand how Baltimore let it get to this point, whether it was using the franchise tag or getting a deal done before it got to this point. I think that was a mistake by a front office that gets a lot of credit. I think it was a mistake, man. And the Raiders here are to benefit. Now, is he the perfect pass blocker? And is that maybe why the Ravens started to justify things internally as to why you don't pay him $27 million? There's some conversations to be had there. I think he's a very solid to good pass blocker. He keeps his feet moving. He's very experienced in terms of blitz communication and keeping everybody aligned. There's a lot of value there. He's undersized. Teams can isolate him and overwhelm him in pass protection. There's no doubt he is not great or elite or anything like that as a pass blocker. As a run blocker, he is top 3 in the league for run blocking centers, undoubtedly. He is a rare blend of athleticism and strength for a guy that is undersized. I think, yes, when he gets isolated in pass protection, his anchor can struggle, but he's got a strong core, a strong upper half. When he's able to weaponize his athleticism with those things and his overall balance, it's nasty, man. Like, he can drive guys off the ball. He can do so much in the run game, but you're going to be able to get creative with him if Clint Kubiak can really dial some fun stuff up, get him on the move as a center, in the screen game, wide zone run blocking. He did it at Iowa, and, they've done it in Baltimore. They're going to do even more of it here. Tyler Linderbaum is incredible. Like, this is an even better version of like the Bears. New coach comes in, pays his center and Drew Dahlman, and was incredible. Tyler Linderbaum's an even better version of that. So like, slam dunk. I don't think the Raiders ever have any regrets about giving Linderbaum all this money. I think it's awesome. But then we do start to get into more question mark territory. I'll jump to Jackson Powers Johnson. And I'm very confident in this player. I am. I think he really breaks out this year. I think in all likelihood, we look back on last year as just a weird, chaotic second season that's going to be a footnote on a really good career here from JPJ. You can't deny that he slipped a little bit in the draft because of some pre-draft medical flags, and he did miss some time here. He's got to stay healthy, right? I'm not going quite as far as like putting, kind of like Brock Bowers, where like I'm not going to put the medical, concern on him. If it happens again this year, we might have to. But beyond that, like I think he just needs He needs that belief system behind him, which did not exist last year. They had him like competing with Alex Kappa for the first like 2 months of the year. And it's like, what are we doing here, man? Like, Alex Kappa was not playing well. Like, it was just weird. And you show up to practice every day going against a bad defensive line. You see Alex Kappa losing all the time, and they're not playing you over them. You start to lose confidence in yourself. So, weird second year that I think the staff botched. But thank God they got him out of there, and now we can get JPJ back in the right track because this dude's an ass kicker. He's got the right mentality. He's played center and guard. I think that's valuable. But I think he does profile best as a guard, or at least that he's got the size to do it. I really do believe here, but we still got to see that proven commodity of JPJ. Now, the real questions start to stack up here. Left guard is still a major question mark. And at this point in time, they have Spencer Bierford, who they're paying about $3 million here, slated to be their left guard. I can't get behind that. I can't. He has hardly developed in his time in San Francisco as a relatively high draft pick. He's athletic. He's gotten better at blocking wide zone. He is a factor in why the run blocking is a little better than the pass blocking. I don't think he's a great run blocker. I don't think he plays with great balance, but clearly he's okay in that category. That's what gets him $3 million on top of just the fact that he has started games for the Niners. But the pass blocking's never developed for him at all. I mean, he infamously cost the Niners a Super Bowl with Spencer Bierford losing, and Brock Purdy gets hit trying to complete a pass that would have won them the game. That's one play, but it's emblematic of his career. He's a problem in pass protection. And teams are really good, especially in the modern NFL, at isolating weak points on an offensive line. Lining up in a way where you have to double or pick up a blitz with Linderbaum and JPJ, get Colton Miller to slide out, and then end up with Bierford on your best pass rusher. I don't like that combination with an immobile Mendoza or Kirk Cousins behind that. So that's a concern right now if he's going to be starting. And I'm not projecting growth from him. I think what you're projecting is hopefully someone else takes that job, ideally before the season starts. We'll see if that happens. Before we talk about right tackle, let's dive into who those guys might be. There is potential there. It's not a guaranteed death sentence here. I would say there's 3 guys, most likely, that give you a decent chance at it not being Spencer Bierford. The first of which I would say is probably Jordan Meredith, who's a hard player to kind of peg down because he had a really good 2024 season where around the second half of that year, he got an opportunity as a 2021 undrafted free agent, really getting out there for the first time. He showed a lot of good stuff. Had this team really excited about what he showed in 2024. And then again, last year happened. They asked him to be their center. He doesn't play as well at center. They pivot back to him playing guard, and he kind of got his ass kicked against Dallas and Cleveland. And now we just don't really know what he is. He's had one half of a breakout season as an undrafted player in 2021, and kind of a rough year last year, at least as a pass blocker. I think the run blocking last year, he was maybe their best run blocker, which isn't saying much. He's 6'3", 300 pounds. He's a little undersized, and that's kind of why they viewed him as maybe a center convert. He gets the yellow arrow for me, which basically is saying like he's a tough player to rank. He could bounce back and be a legitimate starting guard like he was in 2024. And if that happens, you've eliminated your weakest link and are well on your way to being, a top half of the league offensive line. If it's a weak link position, if you can clear out that weakest link, and in this case make DJ Glaze your weakest link, because we're still getting out, we still have to talk about the tackle spot, but the biggest priority is eliminating that guard as your weakest link right now. Meredith is the best hope to do that. He's just very, at this point, kind of unproven and unknown. But then beyond that, you have Caleb Rogers, who was a third-round pick last year and had, in just 6 games of playing time, because I believe he spent a lot of time injured, But he had, I would say, a roller coaster rookie season. Surprise on this O-line last year. But he has really good athletic traits. He's got a really good mind for the position, a good physical mindset. But the games were just a little bit all over the map. He had some really dominant pass blocking games. The last 2 games of the year, though, Giants and Chiefs, gave up 5 pressures in those 2 games alone. The run blocking had good moments and bad moments, which is to be expected from a 3rd-round rookie. But I do think he has upside. I think he has starting potential in the NFL, was a reasonable draft pick with where they took him. And we'll see. I think between him and Meredith, if you're keeping an open mind and going true open competition here, that would be a couple of very reasonable options to beat out Spencer Burford. And then you have Trey Zune, who I think could be looked at guard. Personally, I like him better as a tackle or a center just because he's a little bit of a lankier offensive lineman. Maybe it's more of a personal preference thing, but if I have a guy whose play strength is more of a concern, especially in a wide zone offense, I'm looking more at center or tackle for that player, especially when I do think Zune has the technique and footwork to survive at tackle and might have potential to be a right tackle if DJ Glaze doesn't work out. So he's kind of this like perfect flex addition to this offensive line where you have some different questions. And I think if he looks really good, you might just say our best starting 5 is with Trey Zune out there over Spencer Burford. So I think he could play guard. He's not going to play center, right? Not with Tyler Linderbaum here. So if you just want to find a way to get him on the field, it could be that. So now you are really talking about having legitimate hope to find a left guard here. I can't sit here and rank it as such, right? That's the nature of this series. We're ranking proven commodities. Nothing here is proven. There is a very good chance that they have set a good plan in place. I respect the process of how they've tried to revive this offensive line. And I think there's a better than not chance that something here emerges. Honestly, Spencer Burford would be the 4th piece that I bet on there. There's always a chance that he figures something out in a new environment as well. But that's where you're at left guard, is they got to find an answer. And then you go to right tackle. With DJ Glaze heading into year 3, I liked DJ Glaze as a prospect, as a really good swing tackle, someone with the traits to maybe develop into a starter. His rookie season showed a lot of promise, and last year I think you saw his struggle with power, some glitches in his technique, just inconsistencies, taking losses across the board, not really taking that step from interesting 3rd-round tackle with ups and downs to more reliable player. Still young, still year 3. He's going to get an opportunity here at right tackle. I don't know that I'm necessarily betting on it. It just seems like he, even going back to him at Maryland and now with a lot of tape in 2 years, it doesn't feel like he's kind of put everything together from his feet to his technique and his hands and, just all of the full package that's required at O-line. But maybe this is a big year 3 for him. I do think if he fills out his frame and really puts in time in the gym to become a true strength player at this position on top of being a good athlete, then you could really be in business. But again, I don't know if I'm necessarily betting on it. I see him more as a great swing tackle in time who's had some experience. The dream is that Charles Grant takes on to a new level. And we were never realistically going to see a lot of Charles Grant in his rookie season. New to football and played at William and Mary, was a true draft and stash mid-round draft pick. But now is around the time where you're hoping to reap some of those rewards from a guy that had everything you look for in a potential franchise tackle. It's purely development and hoping that whatever he was told last year can be erased and you can, or maybe he was told some good stuff and developed and we just didn't see much from him. And to be fair, he started week 18 against the Chiefs backups and only allowed 1 pressure. So at least it's better than him playing and not looking good, right? So there's reason to have hope for a 24-year-old Charles Grant to make things interesting at right tackle there. So definitely have the eyes on him, have the up arrow on him, all of that. And same conversation, though. It's like nothing's proven there, but there is for a third round pick, the 99th pick in last year's draft, there's legitimate starting traits there from a small school guy to get fascinated by. And that's kind of the whole conversation, right? That's 9 players deep. Only one other guy is probably going to make this team, if that. Like, you might only keep 9. Will Putnam played a little center for them last year. Antonio Mafi's bounced around the league at this point. Got some undrafted rookie types. You're hoping maybe surprise. But it doesn't really matter, I think, who it is at that point. Just congrats to whoever won that competition. But it's a fascinating offensive line. I really have optimism that we'll revisit this at the end of the year, and in next year's deep dive, this team is at least ranking in the teens, that they can, like, okay, you got 2 questions, right? Left guard and right tackle. I think they've positioned things really well to at least find an answer at one of those spots. 3 guys we broke down as guard options, and then 2 guys at tackle, with Trey Zune also having potential as a tackle just as much as he does at guard. And really, it's 4 at guard and 3 at tackle, because you got to include the guys that are currently starting there who are still young with athletic upside. But yeah, if both of those spots get figured out, yeah, you're talking top 12 for the O-line, because you've got some great talent here, especially if JPJ takes that leap too. So again, we rank these units at their floor. This unit's kind of the perfect example of that, but they've put themselves in a position to get this group to be better as time goes on. And that's the dream. Like, for Ashton Ginty, for Fernando Mendoza, for everybody's sake, this offensive line is what dragged this team ultimately into the dirt and to the number 1 pick last year, on top of other issues. But they couldn't block anybody last year. This freaking matters, man, to get this group right. So keep an eye on those left guard and right tackle spots. But there is your offensive overview for the Raiders. There's stuff to work with. This is not the worst offense in the league. They came out 26th for me for overall offense, which is a fine starting point with a lot of unproven commodities. Actually, a very respectable run game ranking. 17th for run game. Speaks to what I view about Ashton Ginty, what Clint Kubiak has done for the run games that he's been around, the addition of Tyler Linderbaum. I think we can really get this thing going. The passing game ranks 30th. There's a little bit more to be figured out there, really at every position with the offense. But I think a reasonable expectation here is that this team can run the football, that they are a much more functional offense overall. And then over time, you start to hit some of those green lights with the offense. Fernando Mendoza settles in, doesn't look lost, has some good games, probably has some bad games. Like, that's just the reasonable expectation here, but that you don't come out of the year like worried about it, right? That's, to me, I think there's some Raiders fans that are hoping for a 2024 Commanders season. And yeah, that was a best case, like, dream scenario. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think if you want to have reasonable expectations here, at least for the offense, it's that the season ends and you don't have any doubt that this is going in the right direction. Yes, you can point to a couple spots, whether it's a piece on the O-line, a receiver here, a receiver there, that still need to be upgraded, but you don't want to have questions about the key building blocks for this team. Quarterback, running back, Brock Bowers, the big names on the O-line. Like, that's the dream here, and that this team stays competitive because of it. But we still got to talk about the defense. So let's do that. Let's pull a Max Crosby, turn this plane around, and now take a look at this new look Raiders defense, starting with the D-line and their offseason changes there, beginning with the interior of the defensive line. Another area like the weapons where I really would have liked to see the Raiders do more here. As we'll see in a second, it's already not a good unit, and they did very little here. They didn't lose anybody, but their only additions are a very cheap addition of Benito Jones, who comes over from Miami, and Brandon Cleveland in the last round of the draft. So it's staying neutral with the interior of the defensive line. And then at edge, I do look at this group as slightly upgraded, but I'm lower on some of the additions that they did make, paying pretty hefty prices to bring guys like Kwity Paye and Kieran Crawford in the 3rd round. We'll get to those players here. But their only losses here are Tyree Wilson, who had emerged as a rotational piece after being a top 10 pick. They ship him off to New Orleans. And then they actually cut Charles Snowden, which was a little bit of a surprise. I thought he had a nice rotational role here. But I do say slightly upgraded there at the edge group. And then not listed there is Max Crosby and everything surrounding him. Both the saga with the trade with the Ravens that fell through, and just the fact, similar to like I talked about with Marvin Harrison with the Cardinals, who I did not list as an addition for the Cardinals. I'm not going to do that to keep things consistent here with Max Crosby. I kind of have a cutoff of if you played more than half of the games last year, I'm not going to put you as an addition for the sake of this conversation of whether the team got better or worse. But it is worth at least discussing, as we did with Marv. Yes, Max Crosby played 15 games last year. He hurt his knee, and because Max Crosby is a certified badass and psychopath on the football field, he played through what ended up needing meniscus surgery, right? So in a optimistic outlook, he's back after the whole saga played out with Baltimore, and he failed his physical in Baltimore. And I really don't have the energy to get into the whole debate of were the Ravens justified in how that all played out. That was a whole offseason narrative. We can just leave that in the past for now. And ultimately, there's just too much stuff behind the scenes to come to any, firm opinions on it. When it first happened, it seemed a little shady. And then the more and more you kind of think about it and hear stuff, it's like, okay, maybe he really did fail his physical. So there's two sides to the coin there. Again, I don't want to take a hard stance on it at this point in time. But I will say this. At first, it was like, man, I'm kind of excited that Max Crosby's back on this Raiders team. I think it may have worked out for them after they spent a lot of money in free agency and things were shaping up for them. And then you see Ruben Bain fall to the 15th pick in the draft, where the Raiders could have flipped Max Crosby for Ruben Bain and the Ravens first next year. And I'm like, oh, maybe I would have rather had the trade go through. So what I'm saying here is I want to hear from Raiders fans here. Let me know in the comments down below. In hindsight, are you happy that the trade was reversed, or would you have rather the trade gone through? I think it's a very fascinating conversation. But at least back to the offseason changes here, not listing Max Crosby as an addition, but at least worthy of the conversation here that if Max Crosby can get back fully healthy, where he did not play healthy last year, that would also be a theoretical addition to this group, which could be a massive improvement for this defensive line. But again, we're keeping things consistent with the series there, with him having played 15 games last year, and we don't even know necessarily how healthy he's going to be this year, having officially failed his physical in Baltimore. But ultimately, I said slightly upgraded at edge, giving Kwity Paye a big contract, and spending a third-round pick on Kieran Crawford, who we're going to get into here. As we dive into this defensive line, a unit that, man, if Max Crosby was not here, holy hell, this would be one of the worst defensive lines heading into a season that I've ever seen. But Max Crosby, being the superstar that he is, with the expectations that we can reasonably have for him returning here to Las Vegas, uplifts this defensive line all the way up to being the 25th best defensive line in the league, in my opinion, ranking 19th to 22nd for D-line pass rush, and a good bit lower for run defense, where they come in 27th to 29th. But let's start there with Max Crosby, who we've already kind of opened up the door with everything that played out this offseason. Just a wild saga. But I think if you're looking at this from a neutral perspective, trying to weigh all of the facts are Max Crosby has had 2 down years. He is 29 years old, played through a knee injury that clearly limited his play, and eventually they shut him down. And he's a guy that plays with a reckless abandon that, honestly, if you look at the Deebo Samuels and George Kittles and some of the guys that just play so violently as Max Crosby does and plays through the whistle all the time, that can be a play style that leads to some extra hits and leads to you getting banged up. And there's a lot of things stacking up, including the Ravens literally failing his physical. Whether you like how that played out or not, there's a lot of things that suggest, man, Max Crosby just might not be the same guy, or he might not be able to stay healthy if it really is bone on bone with his knee, which some of the deeper, the further and further you looked into the failing physical, that's why they failed him. That's a concern. That's a legitimate worry for me. I really hope that doesn't come to the surface, right? I love Max Crosby. There was a point in time where I thought he was overrated. I've had to eat my words on that, as he has proven time and time again that when he's full force, he is one of the elite defensive player of the year type of candidate edge rushers in the league. And he's a two-way player. Like, he defends the run at an elite level with his motor and all of his traits, and has everything you can look for as a pass rusher. He's got get off, speed rush, finesse, power, you name it. He's incredible when healthy, but that's the big catch there. So he is the biggest wild card, certainly for this defense, and this defensive line, especially as you look at, like, everything depends on him. If Max Crosby can't hold up, and the Ravens were right, wow. Forget everything we said about the offense for a second. You have an all-decade D-line in terms of bad. Like, all-decade bad defensive line here. Let's get into why I think that, because Max Crosby on the field when healthy is a much more simple equation. But the next best player here is Kwity Paye, who they paid a lot of money, 3 years, $45 million. Now, it's more of a 2-year deal than a 3-year deal if you break it down, so they can get out of it after next year, which, honestly, gun to my head, do I think Kwity Paye is on the 2028 Raiders at a cap hit of $19 million? No, I don't. I saw no progress from Kwity Paye. In fact, his rookie season was maybe his best. He, to me, is the definition of a traits-based first-round edge rusher that never really put the pass rush plan together, never really unlocked his physical tools to become anything more than a rotational third in Indianapolis, honestly. I mean, at the beginning, it was like they were really counting on him because he was a first-round pick, and then they kind of learned what he was. He got into a part of that rotation. He's not a bad run defender. He's actually a pretty good one because he's very traitsy and quick to get off blocks. But from a pass rushing perspective, he's pretty consistently been at or just below that kind of 10% pressure cutoff, which is like, okay, if it's a passing down, you can be on the field. Like, if you're below a 10% pressure rate, realistically, like, you don't really want that player on the field. He was exactly 100th out of like 200 players in pass rush win rate last year. I would not have given Kwity Paye $15 million a year. I think he's a $5 or $6 million kind of rotational third piece in your D line that can kind of keep your starters healthy, help you get to third down, and then, yeah, if he's got to be out there to rush the quarterback because someone's hurt or tired, fine, fair enough. But for him to be the second best player on this defense, where your first player has all of these now medical concerns, wow, that's not great. And I know there's been some parts of this Raiders team that I'm like lower on some of the big moves they made this offseason. It just is what it is. I don't have anything against the Raiders, but you can go back and check it. I've had this opinion on Kwity Paye for a long time now. I'm just underwhelmed by him being the core addition to this defensive line. I think he's going to underwhelm for Raiders fans as well, unless he takes some magical leap getting out of Indianapolis that we didn't see for 4 years, where he stalled out as the same player year after year after year after year. So he's here as your number 2. It certainly is not great. And then let's just stick in the edge room. You do have Malcolm Kuntz, who's a fascinating player. I like that he is back here. I think in 2024, he looked like a legit Robin to Max Crosby from a pass rushing perspective, especially. Really had unlocked his game with some power, with some craft, get off, leverage, like really an efficient pass rushing season in 2024. And then, honestly, really tragically for his career arc, he goes down. I think it was an ACL, maybe an Achilles, but a season-ending injury. Sorry, I'm a year ahead. It was 2023. He looked really good. Heading into 2024, he goes down for the season before it ever began. He comes back last year and was not the same. He was still a useful third rotational piece, ended up getting you over that 10% pressure mark, 35 pressures, 4 or 5 sacks. He's actually shown that he can use his quickness and effort to be a factor against the run. He's not a dominant player there, but he's not this true designated pass rusher where you can't play him on earlier downs. He ideally, like Kwity Paye, would be a third piece. And then I do have the yellow arrow on him because the rating I have on him right now, a 74 rating, is kind of in between where I would have had him coming out of 2023, his best year, and what he was last year, where he was a low 70s kind of okay piece. So if he can get, a full year removed, 2 years removed, and get some of that explosiveness back, there's hidden upside in there with him. But he also is still kind of living off of that 2023 season a little bit. So that's kind of where the yellow arrow comes in. He's going to play. I don't think he's going to suck as a part of the rotation here, but a little bit of a wild card in that sense. And then you have the third round pick of Kieran Crawford, who I thought was overdrafted. Again, I'm sorry, I'm not out to get Raiders fans, but look, pre-draft rankings, my draft guide's out there. I had a 4th to a 5th round grade on Kieran Crawford. They spend a top 70 pick on the guy. I just think it was early for what he was. I look at him as very much a traits-based developmental prospect who, checked a lot of boxes as a solid player in the SEC, never stood out as a dominant player to me, but above average to even good traits and just above average tape, but never popped, never looked to me like someone that is going to come into the league and make a notable impact. Definitely someone that can rotate and get a little bit better as still a young player with some tools to work with. But you don't see overwhelming power that's going to make him this efficient bull rusher. You don't see this crazy bag of pass rushing tricks that can set up and stem moves together to dominate a game as a rusher. The run defense was totally reasonable, but again, not dominant run defense tape. So I saw a early day 3 prospect that they're going to be definitely putting into this rotation and hoping a lot from in a critical draft for this team. And man, that 3rd round pick, I see so many holes on this team, whether it's the interior of this defensive line that we've got to talk about, wide receiver, cornerback. I really was not a fan of that pick, man, and I really hope I'm wrong. I do. I genuinely want this Raiders team to succeed, but I'm underwhelmed by him as an addition to this defense as well. I think he'll get incrementally better and be an okay player. I just think they overpaid for what he's going to be, in my opinion, and I would love to be wrong about that. And then you have, Brennan Jackson, Jafari Harvey played a little bit last year, Cian Stone. It's those top 4 guys. That's probably who's going to be rostered here, with Jackson probably on the practice squad. And then you go to the interior, and it's already been a little bit of a negative conversation on this defensive line. Again, not intentional. I'm just being honest here. But this has got to be the worst interior D-line in the league, right? The fact that they didn't add reasonably anybody here other than Benito Jones and a 7th round pick in Brandon Cleveland, it's Raiders fans, it's questionable, right? Borderline laughable. What are we doing here? You're counting on another year of Adam Butler, who's Adam Butler has been the same player that he was coming in 2017 as he was last year in 2025. He's now 32 years old in his 9th season here, 10th season actually. Didn't play in 2022. I don't know if that was an opt-out or an injury, to be honest. But yeah, 10 years into the league. He is the clone of a balanced 3rd or 4th career journeyman rotational defensive tackle. Decent against the run, decent rusher, has never really fluctuated too far up and down on that spectrum. So he's back as right now probably the best player on this defensive line, most dependable. He should be a 3rd or a 4th piece on any reasonably good defensive line. Then Thomas Booker, I like what we saw from him last year. His athleticism is legit. He's bulked up. He showed some power. He's really nasty on stunts, just with his rare athletic twitch. He's the only player here, at least that are the only starter here that does get the up arrow. if he can really continue to get better and become more of a legitimate like number 3 pass rushing piece for a D line, that's great. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibilities if he continues to get confidence with plenty of opportunity here and really starts to stem stuff together. There are traits there. And look, I'm not going to just dump on the Raiders all the time. Like, this was a big win of a trade for them that I was hard on them for. I didn't really understand them flipping Jacorian Bennett for Thomas Booker that hadn't showed a whole lot, in my opinion, but the Raiders had done a really good job looking at a very small amount of snaps from Thomas Booker and said, we can get something out of him. And they did. Booker, especially as the year went on, really came on, but he ended up with 29 pressures last year, didn't end up getting home for any sacks, but they put him in a position where opposing passing games were starting to feel his presence. And that's a really good starting point for him, but he's also incredibly undersized and putrid as a run defender. Right now, he's really just a pass rush downs specialist until proven otherwise. He's a fun piece, but again, most good D lines would look at a Thomas Booker as a guy off the bench that you're intrigued by his later career development here. He's heading into his 5th season at this point on his 3rd team. And then after that, Jonah Lualu had some fun moments as a pass rusher last year. I'll give him that. He's athletic. He's carved out a role as a bottom of the rotation, really pass rush oriented player. But not someone you can trust to hold up as a 3-tack or certainly not a nose tackle against the run. But he's going to have to continue playing here. Benito Jones is your kind of nose tackle if you want to be an odd front team. He's just big and large and takes up space, but really has never progressed in terms of seeing the run or getting off blocks or becoming much of a pass rusher. He's consistently eaten up snaps wherever he's been, whether it was in Detroit or multiple stops in Miami. I guess emphasis on the eaten up snaps for him, but has never been anything close to an impact player. He's just kind of a take him or leave him, replacement level nose tackle. Tonka Hemingway has twitch and can, like a poor man's version of Thomas Booker, be used on stunts and this like designated pass rusher piece. He was drafted day 3 last year. To say he was an abysmal run defender in college and in his rookie season for the Raiders would honestly be a tremendous compliment to what we watch from Tonka Hemingway trying to hold up against the run. Like, he cannot play on 1st or 2nd down, and it's not like he's super efficient as a rusher. And then you have JJ Pegues, who was drafted as a total project last year, who played a little offense at Ole Miss. Interesting athlete, but really didn't give this team anything in 9 games played last year, and at this stage is a total project. You also have 7th round pick Brandon Cleveland. Tip of the cap to the Raiders if they saw something further down and off the radar. I didn't get to Brandon Cleveland as a 7th round pick there. He's probably going to have opportunities to compete for some playing time here. So if he gets out there, we'll see what he can do, but expectations should be certainly tempered there. Sorry, Raiders fans, I'm sorry. I don't want to keep this like overly negative, but you need Max Crosby to be peak form, elite Max Crosby. He is doing not just some of the heavy lifting, all of the heavy lifting. And even if he is fully healthy, like, you can just double team him, triple team him, leave everybody else one-on-one. It's like, we're good here. Like, I'm really worried about this defensive line. I think there were honestly opportunities to do a lot more here. And I would say this is a critical reason why I'm lower on the Raiders at 30th. Some people might have them 27th, but this is a red exclamation mark for me. I don't see much changing here with this unit, even if Max Crosby is fully healthy. Like, obviously he can be an impact and take over some games, but he doesn't really have any help here, man. It's bad. But let's go to the linebackers. Let's lighten the mood a little bit. They made some fun signings here, or at least a fun signing and another signing. Viewers of this channel know I'm not a Quay Walker fan, but I am an Kobe Dean fan. I think that they got the better player for less because he's had a hard time staying on the field in his time in Philadelphia. And then they give Quay Walker the big 3-year, $40 million deal, kind of like the Kwity Paye signing, where it's a former first-round pick with traits that gets overpaid 5 times over based on what his play has been. It's nice to be a first-round pick, man. I mean, we even saw Devin White here playing last year based on his first-round pedigree. But yeah, those are your big additions. Nakobe Dean and Quay Walker, they dish out about $23-24 million a year for those two players combined. Their losses are really unsubstantial. Like Devin White had a Devin White year where he was blitzed and had some moments as a pressure getter and then was just lost all the time. He won't be missed by most people. Devin White probably still has some fans attached to him, but he's gone. Landon Roberts was a useful run defender as he's been for this team. And then Jamal Adams, honestly, he only played 40% of the snaps last year. Hard to call him like a big loss for the Raiders, but you could make a case that he was the best defensive player on the Raiders last year. I mean, especially after Max Crosby got hurt. So he's gone. I don't want to linger on that too much, but he had a good year last year. He did, playing more of a true linebacker role. But ultimately, I do say upgraded. I think their moves were reasonable at linebacker, especially getting Nakobe Dean in here. Quay Walker, we'll start there. And while I'm hard on him, he's at least a practical starting caliber linebacker. He's a very balanced player who I don't think sees the game very well. He's one of the least instinctive linebackers I've really ever watched, and that's why I don't really like him as a player. There's just not a lot of like game-changing plays from him. He's a cleanup artist. He kind of lets the run come to him, but when blockers do get up to him at the second level, he has like really good block shedding. Like he can get off blocks. That's not his problem. It's just he doesn't play upfield. He doesn't see things quickly. He is definitely a nice compliment to Nakobe Dean, who's much more of a go-getter, and I think it's a fun pairing. But the same thing applies with Quay Walker in coverage. He doesn't anticipate things. He doesn't jump routes. He has horrible hands. I don't remember a linebacker that's dropped as many picks as he has. And even as a blitzer, you see like sometimes he'll blow a guy up and it's like, God, this dude is so fast. He can dominate a back, but then he's left in space in the backfield and he can't finish sacks. It's like something's missing with him. There's a cog missing in the machine with Quay Walker, and he's not going to be missed in Green Bay. He's really not. And I think he was overpaid here. But is he a practical starting linebacker that has traits that get him by and limits big plays for the most part for your defense because he's got sideline to sideline speed? He's more often than not a pretty consistent tackler. Like, yeah, it's fine. And when the Raiders have all this cap space, Quay Walker, especially when paired with a really fun complement to him, who was his college teammate in Nakobe Dean, I'm not going to slam it. I'm not. I wouldn't get overly excited about Quay Walker being here either. It is what it is. It's kind of the definition of that. But I really love pairing Nakobe Dean with Quay Walker because Dean is a little bit smaller, much more of a like see ball, get ball, quick trigger, playmaking type of linebacker that will play off of Quay Walker really well. And these guys have a chemistry. They played together in college. They were in the same draft class. Really, the main holdup on Dean is the injuries. Just has been a guy that really fell in the draft because there was a lot of medical red flags with him. Foot injury in 2023, knee injury in 2025, hamstring injury last year as well. He's just had a hard time staying on the field. And if that wasn't the case, I think he's probably still on the Eagles. The Eagles probably don't draft Jahad Campbell, honestly. And Nakobe Dean would be getting paid a lot more money. He got a respectable contract because when he's played, he's been a very good linebacker. He got like $12 million a year despite the injury risks. But yeah, that's really the main holdup on him, and that's prevented him from climbing the ranks even further, where he's got a 78 rating for me. I think that's about what he's earned for how he's played. But yeah, the sideline to sideline speed, the go-getter mentality. He, as a blitzer, especially last year, dude, he's a bat out of hell. And if they want to lean into this even further, we saw the Raiders blitz a lot last year, more than the Eagles blitz. we could see what's a B grade for him as a blitzer evolve to him being even a elite graded blitzer. Like, I've really come to value that aspect of the position as well. So that's a fun thing worth noting with him. Just the way he can detonate run blockers, and he's got bend and that go-getter mentality. And he's compact, like he's strong. Yes, he's undersized. He can get swallowed up against the run at times. And that's why it's nice to have Quay Walker, who's more of a cleanup artist, who's better at getting off of blocks. Nakobe Dean, more often than not, is going to try to outshoot gaps and kind of dip and quick twitch his way around blocks. But if he has to, he can get up and under you, and he's got the strength to hang, but just his size, his mass is a little bit less than you'd prefer at the position. But yeah, I think if he's healthy, he's the better player. And I think the Raiders would probably tell you that too. It's just the contract was a little bit less because of the injury concerns with him. So you pair those two together and you get a very solid, functional, kind of top 2/3 of the league linebacker room, ranking 22nd and 23rd with C+ grades across the board for overall linebacker. A little bit lower for run defense than coverage, 23rd to 24th for run defense, 15th to 19th for coverage. Solid, right? Not going to really make or break your defense. I think practical, solid to good is the best way to describe this duo coming in, raising the bar from what's been, they've had their ups and downs with these linebackers. And they let Robert Spillane in free agency, probably a mistake, kind of making up some ground with that. As far as the depth, they don't have a lot. I do like Tommy Eichenberg, and I liked him coming out. He hasn't had a lot of opportunities here. I think if Nakobe Dean gets hurt, which is a pretty solid if, right? Like, that's kind of been the staple of his career. I would be very interested in Tommy Eichenberg here in year 3. I think he sees the game really well. I think he is athletic. He's just not overly fast. I really liked his college tape, so I do have the eyes on him if he plays, or even if they want a third linebacker out there, if they want to do more base 4-3 stuff. I think he brings you a nice balance between Quay Walker and Nakobe Dean in terms of a little bit more of a physical element, like a block shedding element than Nakobe Dean has maybe, and a little bit more like instincts than a Quay Walker. So maybe we see something from him even if the two starters are healthy there. You have Cody Lindenberg, who had decent tape at Minnesota, but is just so physically limited and has had a hard time staying healthy. Segun Alubi has been a kind of special teams developmental athlete type. They do bring in another Indiana kid, Xavier Sori here, who's in the same ballpark with like Cody Lindenberg and even Tommy Eichenberg, where it's like, all right, he sees the game well, was a really good college player. Does he have the traits to be a good NFL linebacker? Probably not. Really not a traitsy player, but why not bring him in among some other names deeper down the list there. But yeah, the depth is, Tommy Eichenberg's kind of the only guy I'm super intrigued by there. And that's your linebacker room. Not a whole lot of heavy takes on this one, other than I've just never been a big Quay Walker guy. But let's finish up this defensive overview and take a look at the secondary and the offseason changes they made here. They were relatively active. Not a ton of losses either at corner or safety, and the losses they did have are super unsubstantial. Caillou Blue-Kelly, who actually had to play 50% of their snaps last year, tells you where the state of their cornerback room was last year. Not really a loss. And then Lonnie Johnson, who we laughed at as a starter right now for the Dolphins. I think Raiders fans can laugh at that. Like, really? He's slated to start for you? He was not good when he played 3/10 of our snaps last year. So really no losses. The additions here are solid additions. They bring in the veteran slot corner, Teron Johnson. They get him for a 7th round pick from Buffalo to raise the floor of that slot corner spot that's been an issue for them. They draft Jermod McCoy in the 4th round. He's a wild card of sorts because there's been some rumblings that the Raiders think he can play. There was this mass panic with Jermod McCoy, who was slated to go in the top 10 to 15 picks of this draft after not playing in his final year at Tennessee. Unbelievable tape. If he played last year, because he tore his ACL last January of 2025. If he had been able to get on the field let's just say he didn't tear his ACL and he played and repeated what he did at Tennessee last year, Jermon McCoy would have been maybe viewed as the individual best player in this draft if he repeated what he did in his sophomore year at Tennessee. So like that was his narrative coming in. But a week before the draft, maybe 2 weeks before the draft, there was this big report that he's going to need a cleanup on his knee and that he's not going to be able to play again this year, and that would be 2 years off of football. There's been some rumblings that the Raiders aren't as worried about it. They think he can play this year. Is that risk reward? Is that worth it? There's a lot to unpack there, and we'll continue to unpack it as we get into this secondary. But, you know, he is an addition for the long term of this team, certainly. I kind of dropped him in the middle there, just as like, yep, he's been added to this roster. Love the pick, as I talked about in my draft grades videos. Is he going to be a part of this team's season? To be determined. But they also, in the 5th round, drafted a rookie out of Cal in Ezekiah Massis. So they're doing work here at cornerback. I would be surprised if Jermon McCoy is a massive addition to this team this year, as we'll continue to break down. I'm not really on board with him doing that this year, so not really putting him in the picture for this season. With Teron Johnson and Massis, I said slightly upgraded at cornerback. At safety, also slightly upgraded for me. And look, this is not me out to get the Raiders. I have liked the Raiders over the last few years, like for what they've been. I was too high on them in last year's deep dives, for example. I didn't like the Traden Stukes pick. We'll continue to get into it. Solid-ish addition, but thought he was overdrafted. And then Dalton Johnson's a player, 5th round pick, solid addition there. I said slightly upgraded at safety as well. So we're going in the right direction, certainly with the secondary, saying slightly upgraded at both. But let's break this unit down. So it's a wild card unit for this team. There is a lot of potential here in a dream 2024 Commanders season. This could be a top half secondary in the league that you're actually super excited about, but all of the pieces you're potentially excited about are entirely unproven. But it's an incredibly athletic, highly gifted group that could get there. But let's get into it. So I do have them as a starting point ranked pretty low with all those question marks, tied for 28th for overall secondary. And that's just, again, the nature of this series. Unproven commodities are going to come in lower, and you got to show it before you climb up in this type of series where we are looking at these units kind of as is heading into the season and then talking about the upside that they might have on top of that. And let's get into it. So at cornerback, you bring back Eric Stokes, which is great. I mentioned Jamal Adams might have been the best defender on this team last year. Eric Stokes quietly really solid year. I thought he was pretty solid the year before in Green Bay. I thought they should have brought him back for what the Raiders ended up giving him. And then he gets a nice 3-year, $30 million contract to be extended here. He's not really a playmaker. He's kind of this weird corner where no one really talks about him. He's not really someone that gets his head around and finds the ball a lot. He doesn't have a lot of interceptions. He doesn't have these like splash play, instinctive, like nasty plays against the run, but he just kind of does his business, stays in guys' hip pocket, doesn't give up a lot of yards, a lot of touchdowns, doesn't miss a lot of tackles. Very, very steady, good CB2, and now he's compensated as such. He had a lot of rocky moments early in his time in Green Bay, which was to be expected. He was a raw, slightly overdrafted corner out of Georgia with really good speed, and he's kind of figured out his game and settled in as just that, a really good CB2 who right now has to be this team's CB1. So that's kind of your starting point. Perfectly reasonable. Teams have worse CB1s around the league, but your number 2 corner might be the most, outside of Miami, who in a lot of these position groups, is just so far behind the 8 ball. But, Darian Porter, 2nd round pick last year, probably the most unproven CB2 in the NFL because he never started at Iowa State, rotated in that was his 5th year where he started as a wide receiver. His tape was really good at Iowa State, and he is a rare athlete. Height, weight, speed, fluid athletic ability. He's got hands because he was a receiver. but entirely unproven, and was always kind of a weird question mark of like, how did a guy this talented and this good in coverage when he did play, how did he not really get on the field much at Iowa State? And you can kind of justify it a little bit because he started as a wide receiver and all that, but he was drafted off of a rotational role and his traits. And this team last year, who just hated rookies apparently, didn't really play him, especially in the first half of the year. They either weren't playing him or had him in just a kind of like rotation at cornerback, started to get some starts. And then by week 14 on, he was this team's full-time starter, and it was up and down. He had the last 2 games of the year finished very strong against the Giants and Kansas City, so he ended his season on a good note, but his first 3 starts, weeks 14 through 16, ended up getting targeted a lot, 14 times targeted, gave up 9 receptions for about 150 yards. So they were able to get him early, and then he really settled in the last couple of weeks. So like, he's the definition of just untapped physical ability, everything you want, like a built-in a lab corner that has at no point really shown, going back to his time in college, like he can be a full-time starter and be a good player doing so. So he's kind of the ultimate wild card here. I get where they've gotten to the point with Darian Porter. He was a high 3rd round pick, and they're giving him runway here. Like, he's exciting, but I can't rank him very high. Nobody can, right? Like, how could you? So we'll see what they get from him. And then you have Teron Johnson in the slot, who is, we don't need to spend a lot of time on Teron Johnson. He was acquired as basically a salary dump from the Bills, 7th round pick to come into a Raiders team that has a lot of cap, but needed a floor raiser at slot corner where they have no answers right now. And maybe Traden Stukes gets into the equation here. But Teron Johnson's done it for a long time. He has not been the impact player that he was earlier in his career, and he started to miss games. He's not a physically dominant run defender, but he's savvy. He finds the ball. Historically, he's been a pretty solid tackler, but turns 30 here in a couple months, just not what he used to be. Expectations should be tempered. I would imagine 1, maybe 2 years here, and you're hoping someone else can really break through as the slot corner of the future. But it's a reasonable addition to raise the floor of this defense. And then I think it's a question of, do we talk about Traden Stukes next to piggyback off of the Teron Johnson conversation? I think I'm going to wait on Stukes because there's a lot to break down with him. Let's just go through the rest of these corners first. DeCamerion Richardson, I liked as a really nice gamble on traits coming out of Mississippi State. Just hasn't played well for the Raiders. It just hasn't been able to figure things out. Maybe year 3 is different for him, but there's a chance he gets opportunities, right? If Porter's struggling, or Stokes, who did get hurt earlier in his career, if there's an opportunity there, maybe we see more from Richardson, who only played 13 snaps last year, did play about half the year in his rookie year, and was one of the worst starting corners in the league. So we'll see. Maybe something could click. He's got all the tools in the world. Ezekiel Massis is kind of a deviation from that Darian Porter Richardson style. Like, he had very solid tape, but just doesn't have those traits you seek at this position. But a good zone corner, a nice high floor 5th round pick. Nothing wrong with that selection. I think he screams like solid emergency backup type that's not going to get abused, but better route runners, better athletes can take advantage of him, which, if Porter and Richardson really struggle, that might be your best option. And then you have the whole Jermon McCoy thing, which I don't want to reiterate a lot of the points we talked about with the offseason conversation here, but they do think he might be able to play this year. There's a lot to unpack there, whether that's smart or not. If every doctor in the world is saying, no, this guy needs to clean up his knee and then he's good to go, is it worth it rushing him out there to potentially cause more damage to that knee? Is that a decision that desperate, bad organizations make that ruins a guy's career? Look, I know that's a pessimistic outlook, but that's the type of the stuff we look back in hindsight all the time and are like, why did they do that? And if they force him out there, I'd be lying if I said I'm not worried, because a player this talented doesn't get passed up by 32 NFL teams that many times if there aren't very serious concerns here. Now, there's the obvious upside. Like, I feel like the upside speaks for itself. I mean, if he's healthy and the Raiders are right and he plays this year and he looks awesome, you stole maybe one of the best players in this draft, someone I compared to Christian Gonzalez in the 4th round. Like, I could legit sit here and wax poetic about how amazing he is as a football player and how impressed I was by that sophomore year tape at Tennessee. Like, dude, I love taking a risk on him where the Raiders did. I think patience is probably the way to do this. So we'll see if he plays this year, if he can stay healthy, if those knee questions surface. It's only natural for like Raiders fans to want to take the optimistic outlook on this. Like, yep, we're right. It's going to work out. He's going to play. He's going to be a superstar. It could happen, but there is definitely a flip side to that conversation that needs to be had as well. So it's totally wait and see. I hope they just redshirt him, get him healthy, and view him as like a free, like you basically traded a 4th rounder in this year's draft for a top 15 pick in next year's draft. That's how I would want to look at that draft pick. Have the procedure, do things the right way, be patient there. That's what I would do, especially because I don't think the Raiders are winning the Super Bowl this year. I'm sorry to spoil the prediction segment, but I don't. So there's your cornerback room among some other names that might sprinkle in. But then you go to the safeties. You've got Jeremy Chin, who was a really good signing at the time. The Commanders let him go, and he is really settled in as a very solid, big safety. He's someone that like doesn't always have the best coverage feel, the best instincts to have a bunch of plays on the ball. Really struggled in coverage like early in his time in Carolina, but he's definitely developed and learned some things so that he's not a liability in coverage. And his size and physicality and tackling ability, especially from depth and out in space, really plays as a very good safety. So that's a good starting point on the back end. But then you get right back into question marks and sort of that more projectable long-term upside conversation as opposed to any sort of proven commodity. You have Isaiah Pola-Mao is here. He's started a lot of games at this point. Was very fascinating when he first got that starting opportunity, kind of the back end of 2024, but just hasn't really made the most of it. He's struggled in coverage. He's 6'4", he's stiff. He struggles to get himself in a position because he's more of a long-limbed, stiffer mover. And just you need the mental side of things to really tick up to be in the right place at the right time at the safety position, to be more of a coverage impact. Hasn't been the case. That size comes into play as a run defender for sure. It's useful, but in all likelihood, he has stalled out, not really projecting further growth to any substantial degree on Pola-Mao. And realistically, there's a pretty good chance that Traden Stukes is out there as the starting safety, if not week 1, sooner rather than later. Traden Stukes was a very fascinating prospect, and for me at least, a very polarizing conversation in this draft. He was a late riser in the draft landscape where someone that didn't get a lot of conversation until like 2 weeks before the draft, it was like, yep, this guy's going to go top 50. Get ready for it. Usually that's a sign that a team or several teams really like the guy and are going to draft him high, and that starts to kind of trickle through the woodworks, and then it ends up surfacing in this case with Traden Stukes. That was a surprise to me. Traden Stukes to me was a 3rd to a 4th round grade. Incredible straight line athlete, playmaking instincts, was around the ball a lot. He played nickel cornerback at Arizona and played it well from especially like a run defense playmaking point of view. They throw screens into the alley, outside zone, tosses, quick passes. He was all over that stuff. And he plays with his hair on fire. He loves to hit. He has the ball skills. And there's a lot of like upside and fun stuff to like about Traden Stukes. He ran like a 4.33, like that straight line juice and explosiveness is real. But the reason he had a 3rd to a 4th round grade for me is that I actually didn't love his reaction time in coverage. While he has the straight line explosiveness, I think there's a reason he skipped his agility testing. I think in terms of lateral mirroring and change of direction in space, you saw him losing in coverage a fair amount for someone drafted as high as he was as a nickel corner. Additionally, he's a bit of that kind of homeless, positionless player. because his coverage stuff wasn't amazing, he's a little bit bigger. You might project him as more of a safety at the next level, which the Raiders might be doing here. But that's what it is. It's a projection. It's not a role that he played at Arizona. He would occasionally rotate into a two shell. And, sometimes when you see pre-snap motion, you'll see him end up having to play more of a free safety alignment. But he ended up with 19 pre-snap free safety snaps in his final season at Arizona, 0 in 2024, and no more than 10 in an individual season in the 4 seasons before that. And yes, you heard that right. He's a 6th-year player that broke out in that 6th year. He will be a 25-year-old rookie who's a hybrid, projectable player that had shaky coverage skills. And by the way, a reason he spent so much time in college is because he had a bunch of knee injuries. There was just way too many question marks on this player for me to justify them drafting him where he did. I'm not going to sit here and deny that his best case scenario is something like maybe when Chauncey Gardner-Johnson has been at his best and playing in the slot with those playmaking skills, the speed, the energy that he brings there. I understand what they're going for here. I just can't really get behind him being the 38th pick in the draft as a plug-and-play answer in this secondary with the way it's constructed when they have other needs that we've talked about as well. So, it's one of those picks where it's not that it can't work out. It's just, was the probability of it working out equal to being the 38th pick in the draft? I definitely have my questions, and I'm really hoping I'm wrong about that. Now, again, back to how he fits into this secondary. If he's going to win the safety job, that's going to have to be him showing something completely new. It's not something he did at Arizona. You can project those skills and say, yeah, the speed, the ball skills, the instincts, the run defense willingness should translate to at least a strong safety role for the Raiders, which it was a hybrid defense at Arizona. He did some more strong safety stuff, which is going to be like less than 10 yards deep from the line of scrimmage. That's probably more projectable than just saying he's going to be a single high free safety for you in a lot of those looks. So maybe that's his role, and that's what Isaiah Pola-Mao has largely done in this defense. So that's a reasonable projection. I think if you wanted him to be more of a true free safety, that's where it is much more of a dart throw. Like maybe a few years ago, I would have been much more on board with that, but that would remind me a lot of like Dax Hill or Quan Martin, who I really thought would be seamless in that transition to more of a free safety role. Both guys were, in my opinion, comparable prospects in terms of what they did in college as a slot player and their speed and ball skills and that kind of stuff, like all kind of in the same ballpark. Those guys have failed miserably as free safety prospects. So it's not that Stukes can't do it, but there's examples of similar players giving us evidence that can be a tough transition for these guys to make. I struggle with where he's going to end up and positionally and taking a hard stance on it, but I think it's probably more likely that long-term he's more of a nickel. I think that's what his best tape was in college. That's where his burst, his willingness to get to the ball, his just instincts in that part of the field is going to play best. But you have Taron Johnson there right now. So it just gets a little bit murky. I don't think this is a case where you're talking about this being one of these 3 safety nickel based defenses like we talked about with the Dolphins and a lot of these teams are doing with that kind of like big nickel safety role. You're not going to like take Taron Johnson, who's one of the better players in there, off the field to do that with Pola-Mao out there. So they might stick Stukes as more of the strong safety and see if he can win that job out, or they're just going to be patient with a 25-year-old, nickel corner prospect and just wait till Taron Johnson's done here and then give that to Trayden Stukes. Again, it just wasn't my favorite process for this team with where they're at, but there's excitement with the player and a path for him to be an impactful guy. It's a little bit it's a little more murky, a little more roundabout to get there, and we'll see where it goes there. But again, there's upside with Trayden Stukes. I liked Dalton Johnson as a day 3 draft pick. He was Stukes' teammate. They clearly loved Stukes' tape and were like, wait, I think Johnson wore 43. I think they were probably like, wait, that number 43 guy's making some plays on the back end. And if you're talking about like who actually played safety in that Arizona defense, who showed the read and react skills from more deeper alignment, proved that they can take the right angles and be more of that actual safety in that defense, Dalton Johnson was pretty damn good at it. I like Dalton Johnson. I didn't think Dalton Johnson was that far behind Stukes as a prospect. I think I had a 4th to a 5th round grade on Johnson, 3rd to a 4th round grade on Stukes. So I'm not going to necessarily sit here and, predict that Johnson actually starts over Stukes in year 1. But it certainly would not surprise me either if Johnson's they get to practice and they have a safety competition, not a nickel competition. If Johnson's just better as a safety because he has actually done it before. And then eventually if that nickel corner opportunity opens up, maybe Stukes eventually becomes the better player in time. They have Tristan McCollum, who is Zion McCollum's brother, athletic just like his brother, but hasn't really broken through in any regard as a starting safety. Just depth and special teams capabilities, and then some undrafted guys like Tanner Wall and Devin Lafayette. So there is your secondary. I think you can get the picture here of like how they come in as a lower ranking secondary. They rank 28th to 29th for me with a C grade as a starting point. Probably not going to be much worse than that. The arrows are really only pointing up other than Teron Johnson, who's getting up there. But they definitely got to go out and prove it. So let's tie this defense together, and they do come out as my 30th overall defense, pretty low there. This is a concern for me and a key reason why the Raiders come in as my 30th team in these rankings. We've hinted at some of the upside, right? Especially the secondary. Like that would be the part of this defense that if you hit your green lights, you can really I think if you hit every green light in that secondary that currently ranks 28th to 29th, if Jermod McCoy plays, that's a miracle situation. But even if McCoy doesn't play, let's say Darian Porter breaks out, Teron Johnson stays healthy and is revitalized in a new situation. If Traden Stukes breaks through and is just a really good safety in his rookie year, that's a complete unit. And then you have the little Jermod McCoy sprinkle of hope on top of that. Like that could be a top half secondary in the league. And then I would say too, the coaching that we talked about earlier in the video, Rob Leonard is fascinating to me. If he can prove to be a really good coach here with a good secondary, you can work around Max Crosby if he can stay healthy. Okay, this could maybe be the 20th best defense in a best case scenario, but they just have a lot of pieces still to build here. They weren't going to fix everything overnight. And that's what leaves them here. So they ended up 27th in pass defense and actually 30th in run defense, which is an even bigger concern for me with this side of the ball. But before we start to get into predictions territory for this team's season, let's talk some special teams, the third side of the ball here. So they did make some changes. Daniel Carlson, kind of a quick fall from grace here. They say goodbye to him and bring in Matt Gay, who has really bounced around the league after getting a big contract just a few years ago. And then Derek Young, also listed as a kick return addition here. So I use a calculated formula for my special teams projections, and the kind of objective metrics don't like the Raiders' special teams. They actually came out as the worst special teams in the league. It's not the end of the world. You can easily prove this to not be the case, but they did rank very low last year, both with the PFF and DVOA team grades for special teams. Matt Gay is a question mark at kicker. It really is. If you take his 2-year moving average, the 28th best kicker in the league. He's bounced around the league for a reason. They do have a great punter in AJ Cole, so that's great. And then they did find a good kick returner there in Derek Young. It was just 1 year of it, but he had some big-time plays there, so hopefully he can keep things going there. They don't have too much of a punt returner there. Trey Tucker is probably going to handle those duties, and he hasn't really emerged as anything special in that role. So that's how you end up 32nd in special teams. But let's do our team summary here with our strengths, weaknesses, and re-highlight those key pivotal factors that are really going to make or break this team's season. So the strengths to me are just a couple of things, unfortunately. Running back, I do project as a strength with Ashton Ginty. I'm a big buyer into that. And then Kubiak coming in with the play calling should be a major strength. It's really the baseline of what you have to work with. Weakness is you've got weaponry. You've got weak spots on the offensive line that need to be hammered out. I think the D-line, even with Max Crosby, is a weakness. And then the secondary, I would say, in its current state, is a weakness. Now, what you're looking for in a big first year of this new regime is some of these wild cards to hit green lights and go in the right direction. Some of these you would drag outside of the weaknesses category if you hit on these wild cards. Some of them are more just middling question marks that could maybe become more of strengths. Like, I didn't put quarterback as a weakness necessarily, but I'm not ready to say it's a strength. If Fernando Mendoza is just awesome and as the number one pick, he's, like CJ Stroud was in his rookie year, or Jaden Daniels, like, you never want to be too certain on any of these quarterbacks. I have my opinions on Fernando Mendoza. I'm not going to reiterate them, but if he steps in just immediately and is just freaking awesome and he's attacking the middle of the field and just does it, like, great. Quarterback can be a strength. That's a possibility with Mendoza. The offensive line, we hinted at them really putting in place good potential solutions. It's potential right now, but if left guard and right tackle get answered this year, O-line could go from all the way from being a partial weakness to being a legitimate strength for this team. I think that as a unit has the most upside out of any spot on this team. Max Crosby alone is the biggest X factor for this defense. If he gets hurt, I think things fall apart really quickly, and you're probably talking about this being the worst defense in the league. The secondary, we just went through all of that, the upside that needs to be unlocked with so many pieces here. And then the defensive coaching as well, we just talked about. So there are aspects of this team that could give the Raiders that dream first year with the rookie quarterback season that I think there are some Raiders fans that are aspiring for. Now, am I personally projecting it as we take a look at their schedule? Well, they play in a tough division with the Chargers, Chiefs, and Broncos. And then they drew the NFC West as their divisional matchup, which is another very good division with three potential playoff teams outside of Arizona, who we've already done in this series. And then the AFC East, which is going to grant some easier games in there with games like the Dolphins, week 1 at home. Okay, great. Maybe we could get this thing off to a feel-good start against a team that's in a tough spot right now. At the Jets, they're... Spoiler alert, they're going to be coming up relatively soon in this series. So you've got some winnable matchups in there. They also have that last place schedule. They get a team like Tennessee at home later in the year. There are winnable games on the schedule. They also have at Cleveland as that 4th place matchup. So yes, there's some opportunities for this team to steal some wins that are going to be some closer games. It's going to make the over-under, I think, relatively tight as far as where this team lands. The math actually says, about 5 wins for this team is about right. And when you look at their over-under, it is 4.5 wins, and it doesn't pay very well to bet the over right now. Like, that's pretty close in terms of the statistical projection of it. My final opinion, my prediction on the Raiders is going to stay consistent with this 30th power ranking. I am just lower on this Raiders team. I'm not going to rehash every single point. We're 2.5 hours into this video. You've seen some of the pockets of moves that they made where I just happen to be lower on some of these guys. And if I've got to sit here and predict the wins of all 32 teams, I think it is going to be a more longer rebuild here for the Raiders. Not that they can't get there, not that they can't hit some of these green lights and leave you with some areas of excitement, but in terms of winning football games, I do think this is going to be a longer season for the Raiders. So I had them at 4 wins. I do think their ceiling is 8 wins. There are aspects of upside that I cannot deny. And that would be a really feel-good outcome for the Raiders. If you win 8 games in Mendoza's rookie year, that would be like generating real hype into the next season. So I will say that is possible. I do think a worst-case outcome is 3 wins. And I'm especially looking at the 2 biggest pieces of this team on both sides of the ball, Brock Bowers and Max Crosby. I hate to bring it up, but like, those guys have dealt with injuries at this point. And if those guys are getting hurt, everything kind of falls off on both sides of the ball pretty damn quickly. A lot pivots on Crosby and Bowers right now with those also important D-line and weaponry spots on this team. So I've got the floor of 3 wins, the ceiling of 8 wins. My final prediction is a 4-win season for the Raiders. And then let's wrap up with some fun and do my team superlatives awards for this team. So the team MVP, which I do not go with quarterback because that would be the easy way out for so many of these teams, I did go with Brock Bowers. I really think that Clint Kubiak's going to know how to lean into him. I think he's awesome. I think he's an incredible mismatch problem, and everything we talked about throughout this video, the way they're going to use him through this scheme with 12 personnel, I think it's going to be awesome. And he's going to be, for me, the team MVP. And I think overall, I think things will go better offensively for this team than they will defensively. I think I'm more optimistic for that side of the ball than the defense. Biggest wild card has to be Max Crosby. If Max Crosby gets back to top 10 player in the league, defensive player of the year status, and he's on this FU tour and his knee is looking good, that can uplift the defensive line, and that's going to help so many of these pieces in the secondary reach their upside. That's where you start to talk about things coming together. And inversely, if he's not out there, we saw that defensive line without him. He has got to be the biggest wild card on this team with that knee. And then breakout offensive player, there's a couple options I thought about here. I did go with Jack Besh. I do believe in his fit in this system. I believe in the player. I think he just needs a coach that knows how to use him and is willing to play him. I'm optimistic for how things are going to go there. And I especially am cautiously optimistic that he can be that outside back shoulder guy that would be so critical for this passing game, at least for this season. And then breakout defense, I really struggled with this one, man. There's just not a lot of players on this defense that I truly believe in. I hate to say it. I don't even really believe this in my heart of hearts. Darian Porter feels like a little bit of a dart throw at this point at 25 years old. Just hasn't really clicked for him. But who else was I going to go with? I don't see a lot of true breakout options here. I thought about Tommy Eichenberg because Nakobe Dean's injuries do scare me a little bit, but that just is a little harsh to do that because I do like Dean the player. I guess Darian Porter's my answer here. I'm not particular, I don't have a ton of conviction in that, but he's a fun player. There's a reason I picked him here. There's a path for him to figure it out here in a big second season. Best rookie had to be Fernando Mendoza. I think there's a pretty good chance we walk out of this and Mendoza looks like a practical young quarterback. And then fantasy MVP, which is also baking in some value in terms of your fantasy drafts and kind of who to target. Even with that, I said Ashton Ginty. He's currently going with the 12th pick as RB6 right now. I'm buying in, man. I think probably the area I'm most optimistic for this team is that offensive line to figure things out as the year goes on, and Ashton Ginty. That's a nice pairing. And Clint Kubiak and the 12 personnel stuff. I really do believe in that. I think Ashton Ginty outperforms RB6. I think he's going to be a big part of the passing game as well. He's a guy I've been trying to get. He's not easy to get. But I see a lot of value in Ashton Ginty this year. I think he's going to be freaking awesome, and people are going to be reminded how special of a prospect he was. So there is your final predictions for the Las Vegas Raiders and your Raiders deep dive. Raiders fans, I do genuinely like this team. I think they are very fun to cheer for. There's a lot of fun pockets of this team. I know there are aspects of this team that I come off as negative. It just is the way the deck landed. You guys signed a lot of guys I'm not super stoked on. Kwity Paye, Quay Walker, second, third round draft picks. I just kind of for me. Trying to keep things real, but I am genuinely pulling for this team. I pray we look back on this 30th ranking and it ages like milk, right? But let me have it, Raiders fans, in the comments if you think this is too low. If you think I'm spot on and this deep dive was great, this ranking is just right, and we got to see where things go with this team, let me know as well. And of course, let me know who you think comes next with the 29th ranking in this series. Very much looking forward to that. It's not going to be a 5-day wait. I've been very sick this week. Finally had it in me to sit down and record. So happy we got through it. Happy you guys got through the video. Please do hit that like button if you have not yet. It really does help. And I'm going to stop yapping and let you guys go. Cheers.